Hello, everybody. Let's see. Now, before we all get to start, I do have to apologise. It's a bit delayed starting. Birthday boy wanted to go on the garden. But as you all know, I use the Patreon funding to support my research. I also do it to occasionally sort out someone else, and he's been waiting very patiently for his present all day. This is the present from the people, from you very kind people, because I basically used Patreon money to get him an extra present. I didn't think any of you would object, but I did make him wait till he was what you were watching him before giving it to him. So you have supplied him with a giant chew. Hopefully you enjoy this. You've been sniffing all day and keen on it, and now the moment you're bringing it on camera, you're going, I'm going to be very genteel with this. Is it too big? Too heavy? Oh no, you've got it. Oh no, you're happy with it. It's now being chewed. The poodle is happy. The poodle is happy. So there we go. The poodle is very happy. That is his birthday. He is a happy fluff. A bot should be coming on and live to take questions as we go through. I am just making sure Twitch is running before we start too much, as I should be on both. It says it should be working. And hello everyone, how are you all doing tonight? How is everyone doing? Oh, yeah. We're having fun times, basically. There's lots of interesting stuff going on today. I've been surrounded by various builders. But don't be surprised if this does get rather high energy, because, well, I've pretty much lived off thin air all day. So I'm probably going to be drinking quite a lot of Iron Brew this evening, because we've had powers down, power up, water down, water up. It's been a fun day. It has been an absolutely fun day. You're now very happy, are you? You are. You're very, very happy down there, you know. There we go. Yes, Twitch is working. Hello. 5x5 by Jonathan Moon. That's good. Everyone's happy. That is wonderful. I'm going to swap those things over so I can see different parts of my screen. Yes. The thing about Restream, though, when it's doing this, is at the moment it works quite happily. Whether the BT system or the Starlink system is the internet, it works with both. And also point out, before anyone goes too much wondering, this is what happens when you try and give a birthday boy his medications on his birthday and he doesn't want them. I got a paw to the mush, which just caused a look up. Fun times. Anyway, so, trials and tribulations. Why ships go through testing and the testing they do before they enter service. Now, this is going to be a fun video because there are a lot of parts of the testing process which often get disputed by various people, especially when they're trying to save money. It's usually one of the things that nations are most likely to do is to go, oh, we can save money by cutting this portion of testing. Or we can change when we do the testing. We can do testing pre-commissioning or post-commissioning. The reality is you want to do the testing pre-commissioning if you can. Okay? You want to put your ship through trials pre your commissioning. You want to do as much testing as you can pre-commissioning as possible. The reason is most procurement contracts still are written as such that up until commissioning, it is still proportionally owned, at least, by the builders. And therefore, the cost rests on them without the need for a lot of legal work. If the trials are conducted post-commissioning, then the cost usually disproportionately burdens on the government doing the procuring. So, you do want to try before you buy. Okay? Now, the fact that governments get conned into this quite regularly into doing this the improper way, because of various people saying it's going to save money and it's going to be more efficient and all these things, there are arguments about this. most of the arguments usually come down to it being more efficient because, we'll get to control the crew will be a full naval crew and all these things. There are ways to run around that. There are ways to run around. There's partial commissioning. There's partial acceptance. You accept the ships by sector or even room by room. There are all sorts of options. Now, trials, they come in many shapes and forms, but broadly speaking, what they're going to be testing depends on the ship you're dealing with. But, broadly speaking, the trials are about this. Build quality. Yeah, build quality matters. Someone is very, very happy with their boat, and if you can hear chewing going on the mic, that is a very happy birthday poodle, who has basically not eaten his food all day, looking forward to getting this thing. Speed and efficiency, maneuvering, shock, systems, sensors, weapons, exercise, and operations. Now, that's not all the slides we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the various stages the ship goes through. Now, one of the fun things that usually comes up is has time got longer as ships have got more complex? Yes and no. You see, one of the reasons why it's got more complex for ships going to use is that there used to be quite a bustle them going through. So you'd be able to do more batch testing. And you had more testing crews and more testing facilities and more places to test the ships. With less ships going through, you have less facilities. And actually, the facilities have often disappeared in a greater proportion than the ships have gone down. Why? Because, again, it costs money to keep these things open. So they try and make the same testing facilities do multiple things, which can lead to congestion in the testing facility. But again, you can't really blame people doing this because, well, how else do you start to rate the costs and offset the costs? Because you've got less ships to go through them, so why would you have more? Why would you be doing more? Why would you be doing all those things? It's basically people looking at it from a accountancy perspective, but also to an extent from a sensible perspective, because taxpayers' money shouldn't be wasted. But there's also a problem of then you wasting your money in other directions, and sometimes it's a judgment as to where I'm wasting money. Because sometimes having capacity is technically an economic waste, but is an operational advantage, which means you get more efficiency out there. Again, trials, testing, ship procurement, it's all about it's realistically, this is one of those sort of systems where you have to judge where do you want the waste to be. Would you rather the waste be in, we've procured slightly more ships than we actually technically need, so we've got slack in our system, so when there's an emergency, we can adjust that more easily. But technically, normal periods, we are able to generate another destroyer than we actually need. That's terrible. We're able to generate an extra ship than we really technically need. I'm devastated. It's going to cause me so many issues. But it means when there's a crisis and I need more than I normally need, I've got the slack in my system. So this is why I tend to give the firehouse, what I call the fire service rule of efficiency. The fire service aren't judged by the metric of how many fires do they deal with per year. They're judged by the metrics of how many fires do they reach in a certain amount of time, and how well do they handle those fires, i.e. lives saved. Those are the important metrics. The fact that means a lot of fire engines, a lot of fire crew sitting around for a large chunk of the year, just doing training or cleaning and checking their equipment, doesn't come into it, because we're not rating them by how active those fire engines are. We're rating them by how useful they are when we need them, because basically if we're rating by how active them, we'd have the fire engines travelling all around the country and only a few of them, and they never reach a fire on time, but they constantly be active because they constantly be moving. It would look incredibly efficient from a utility perspective because those vehicles would constantly be in use. But from an actual effectiveness in terms of the fires being dealt with, it would be incredibly ineffective. So it's sort of something similar you have to think about when you talk about the armed forces. Am I getting this stuff so I can be incredibly efficient in terms of dealing with my base load and have the minimum, the most efficient number of vessels I need to deal with my base load, or do I need more? And when it comes to trials and testing, do I want to have a system which is set up to move the ships through trials, testing, and commissioning as quickly as possible? Or am I prepared to have that take a long time? And one of the reasons why it takes a long time is because partially enough time passes between every single class that are commissioned, in the UK at least, that you have to almost redesign the systems you're going to test them with every single time you have a new class. You are really going to town on that. You look happy as anything. I mean, I haven't seen you that happy with a treat toy in ages. Okay. So the first thing first is the first crew. Before you start to get any testing, this is the first part of quality control. How do navies ensure quality control? Well, the same way they have for generations. They get people they can trust aboard the ships as quickly as they can. Here's the fun thing. The first captain of HMS Queen Elizabeth never took her to sea. Never took her to sea. He also was appointed after she already had crew. Here you go. Captain Simon Pettit. He's a really cool guy. If you're ever lucky enough to meet him, he is a really cool guy. Again, he will not remember me at all. I once met him at a dinner. I remember him because the sort of thing that sticks in my head is, oh, you were the guy who was on board HMS Queen Elizabeth before she was even commissioned, all these things. Yeah. HMS Queen Elizabeth is ordered in 2008. She's laid down in 2009. She's launched in 2014 and commissioned in 2017. Her first captain, Simon Pettit, senior naval officer from 2012 to 2016. 2012 to 2016. The ship's not even been commissioned. She's got a naval crew aboard. He joins the crew. The crew are 9 strong. Okay, there's 9 personnel aboard. There's a previous senior naval officer who is, I think he was a lieutenant commander. By the time he leaves it, she's got a crew of 580. She's not yet been commissioned. She's still got 580 personnel aboard. Now, these personnel are all there ensuring the ship's delivered meets the mission, role, and specifications required. Because again, one of the things you want doing is you want the ship set up in a way it can actually be used by its personnel. So you want people involved as early as you can in construction who are actually going to be end users. Okay? Again, this might seem strange, but think about this from another point of view. Of every other product that's developed, it's tested beforehand. They do product testing, they put it out to the public, so they do alpha testing, beta testing, Charlie testing, all different testing systems and processes. Well, basically, this pre-commissioning crew are the alpha and beta testers of the Queen Elizabeth. They go around it, they're testing it, checking out the systems. Does it work? They are critical to developing that ship. Again, this is not going to make things shorter in terms of time length. This is going to be the first of class. Okay, first, the thing that happens, again, as we're building ships is usually we get quicker and more efficient at building ships the more of a class we build. So the first of a class, we might get 1 or 2, weeks saved by the crew being aboard. But by the time we've got to the 3rd or 4th or 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th or 9th or 10th, you see gradually seeing the crew's involvement, the memory, the retention and the of memory from the dockyard workers and from the ship's crew as they move personnel around from commissioning ship to pre-commissioning ship to pre-commissioning ship and all these things, and pass information around, speeds up the process of delivery. Which is why the last ships are often built so much more quickly and commissioned so much more quickly than the first ships. Part of that, of course, is the testing process, because some of the testing, you don't do every single ship. You might not put every single ship in a class through shock trials. If you're doing a large enough class, you might only put some sample ships through shock trials. We'll talk about that in shock trials as we get on with this, because they're a big thing for warships and are often something which, especially the US Senate, seems to get very worried about. Shock trials. Have there been enough? Will there be enough? What will they be doing? All these things start to build up and matter. Okay? Now, let's see. Let's see. Has that gone live? Yes, it has. I'm worried about you, Bruno. Now, with this development going on, with this class involved and this first crew involved, they are also going to be, as well as checking the quality, checking the systems of the ships, they're also going to be quite important in providing immediate design feedback. This is also probably the start of which you have the feedback going into the design process. The start of the scenario where you're going to go, well, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to do this? What are we going to do? All these things start to build up at this point. So, this is the point when we have the scribboard that you start having probably the first point of people going, I know the architects have said this will work on their computer program, and I know everyone in the civil servants and senior officers who were seeing this on the design plan said this worked, but I can't operate this computer position because I got a light in my eyes. Kid you not, actually happened on the design. Not the Queen Elizabeth class at a different ship, but it actually happened. There was literally lights positioned, and the light had been positioned at such a point that it was actually reflecting off the computer screen straight into the eyes, so you couldn't see the screen at all. Okay? You'd have thought it wouldn't be the case, but they were trying out, they'd got new lights on their specs, said it shouldn't be a problem, but it did. It turned out to be a problem in practice. In theory, it wasn't a problem. And everyone's design specs, it wasn't a problem. Once they actually did it and tried using it, it was a problem. It's far better to find this out before the ships even left the dockyard, when there are a lot of basically dockyard electricians wandering around who can move a light very friggin' quickly, than it is to have to fix it after you've been operating at sea and gone up through that whole chain of command. No, in this scenario, the message went up. I don't think it even reached the senior naval officer board. It reached the guy who was on the watch, and this is how I know the story. And he talked to his counterpart from the dockyard and mentioned it to him, and it was literally fixed before it even involved any of the seniors. When it came down, it had been fixed. Basically, the senior electricians in the room had looked at the person trying to operate, and went, "Yeah, this is terrible. Okay, we're going to work it out." And they basically sorted it by just moving the light. I think it was about an inch. I think it was something really, really small in terms of distance, and it was all fine. And they just corrected all the lights that were in front of various computer stations, and they moved them, and it worked. So, build quality. Now, some people ask me sometimes why I am insistent on calling the Type 23s light frigates. They were built and designed as light frigates. You've just been chewing this. Do you think you deserve something when you've got this? They've already given you this. They've given you a lovely treat. Alec, you're showing it off to everyone now. Okay, all right. Now, why do I insist on calling Type 23s light frigates? Because one of the things that happened when they were built, because they were supposed to only have a short service life, etc., is they actually didn't use the same thickness of steel as they used on things like the Type 22s, etc. They saved money. That's one of the reasons why you can start to see, look at her panels. Look at how much they have been caved in. You can see the actual subdivision behind the panels. Now, this happens to all ships over a certain amount of time in service. It really does. But, and this is the real problem in the scenario we're talking about, if you build it with slightly thicker steel, it takes slightly longer. If you give that steel more support. This is why, in a very real terms, subdivision has an effect on ship lives. Why is it destroyers are supposed to start under the treaty system are given a shorter lifespan than cruisers and capital ships and carriers? Because those ships will have greater subdivision and thicker hull steel and thicker support. So basically, you don't want your ship to look like this when it comes out. But there's a myriad of other issues with build quality. There are things like seals, as in the seals on the pipework and the pipe system, or seals on the propeller shafts. There are the reality of what materials are actually being used in the build quality. Again, one of the things is if you have good crew there, if you have good people there, it's easier to make sure everything is honest, and also that the service as a whole understands it was honestly built. Okay? One of the problems they had at certain points, this was in the Royal Navy, but also in other navies, was when they've reduced the number of people involved in the process at the beginning, it's easier for myths and tall tales to begin to circulate about the build quality on ships, on what exactly was done with them. For example, if you've ever been on board a Type 23 frigate, and you have seen the very lovely pattern, floral pattern used in various mess spaces as the covering for the chairs and benches, you will have probably heard the story that it was left over from from something like the 1970s. Now, I'm sorry to disappoint people. I actually looked it up and did look into this. The pattern was was not the 1970s. The pattern was actually a 1950s, 60s pattern. There's a debate as to exactly how late in the 50s or early in the 60s it comes out. And the material was actually newly produced to the same old standard because no one had updated the material standards for the hulls, for the not the hulls, for the furniture. Sorry, this is the trouble with having the hull in front of me, and I'm always distracted by this picture. This was Iron Duke, by the way. And yeah, they were having fun. They were having fun with that ship. He's always staring at me. He is a good boy, but he is always staring. He is a good poodle, though. And he always wants attention. Now, with this being said, build quality builds into a lot of what we do next. Speed and efficiency trials. Now, this is the point where you start to get a lot of lying entering into this trial process. A lot of lying. Okay? What do I mean by a lot of lying? I mean a lot of lying. I mean a horrendous amount of lying. I mean an absurd amount of lying. So, speed and efficiency trials are probably the most political aspect of a warship's trials. They are also the part of which services will play the most games. Some navies like to play down their speed. Some navies like to play up their speed. Often the most powerful navies will want to play down their speed. The larger a navy is, the slower it wants its ships to look like that. Why? Because they want to have an edge which people don't realise. So they will tend to undervalue their speed. So when they're doing for speed and efficiency trials, they will load their ships up with everything they can. There is not a chance of that ship being misclocked in speed. It is fully loaded, and the speed you're getting is of the ship brand new but fully laden, maybe or maybe not with some maybe not with some actual artificial disadvantages added in as well. For example, the Royal Navy would never, even if ships could do forced draft, They would never try. Well, they did once or twice, but very rarely did they report the ship's speeds under forced draft. So the speeds you get for the ships in trials and the speeds you get listed as their official top speed are their normal top speed, not their forced draft top speed. Why does forced draft matter? Because when you're pumping in extra air into your engine rooms to try and feed the boilers with more oxygen, it's a way of increasing their speed. Basically, it's kind of like nitrous, but for ships. And it's not quite as effective as a nitrous is. But, it's the same idea. It's the same principle. It's, can I cram more oxygen into this? That's going to make it better. If you're the Germans, for example, Seydlitz, good example here, achieved 28 knots utilizing forced draft under trial conditions. There's a reason they was lifted at 26.5 knots. Because, honestly, when it was doing the trials, it wasn't under what we would call, it was under German test conditions, not what you would do in a sort of, if you're Royal Navy. In a nice way, it's the opposite. The Germans want their ships to look as fast as possible, so they will lighten a ship. It won't be a full load. It won't be a full combat load. It won't have full ammunition, all these things. It will have everything reduced down, if it has it aboard at all, to give them the maximum possible speed. And again, forced draft 20 knots. Being seen, forced draft adds roughly a knot and a half on their regular top speed, onto the regular non-forced draft top speed. A knot and a half. That can be a big difference. Again, lies, damn lies and statistics, as Leslie has put in. Not quite the same thing here. Because in this case, it's more a case of how do you rig the testing. So what is the speed and efficiency testing actually about then? If it's not about the actual top speed, if that's really not what we're aiming for, we're going to artificially affect it. What are we really looking for? And it comes down to the efficiency. So you're looking at efficiency engines under certain conditions, and you extrapolate from that to work out how efficient your engine is. This is how we start to work out what the ship's range is likely to be. Again, there are going to be active liars here. If you fully laden up your ship, you get a more accurate image. If you overload your ship, it's going to be inefficient in the water. Now, there are other ways that you can boost its inefficiency quite naturally. So again, when you're dealing with the US Navy, the Royal Navy, and to an certain extent the Italian Navy, and I would say today the Chinese Navy, I wouldn't be surprised if they do the similar things, you will not get, the range statistics are historically, I'm speaking for, not quite trustworthy. Because they don't include, they sort of might not include things like figures for the fuel you're carrying as ballast. They might not include things, the idea of what you're doing in other circumstances with these ships. Like they, okay. I don't want to. If I go into too many statistics, it will make it look too clear for modern times. But I'll try and do this in a way which isn't going to get anyone pointing at people too much. It's the testing conditions. So if I run a ship into a heavy current, I know that's going to make it more inefficient because it's dealing with more water pushing against it to make it going through the water more difficult. However, that's not the worst condition. If I can run a ship with wind and current coming from a beam, trying to push it off course, so it's got to fight to maintain course in a straight line for me to do my straight line trials, that will really affect its efficiency and its speed. So, if you look at some of the trials areas and you look at the current maps, you can work out very quickly which trials areas used to get which type of statistics. Because if a ship has water pressure coming in it, that's one thing. If the ship's got water pressure coming from behind it, that's a boost. If a ship is likely to have wind and current coming from a beam, so pushing it, and it's got to fight to keep in a straight line, so it's a natural thing is going to push it off that way, but it wants to go that way, so it's got to push the whole time to keep a straight line, that is going to be its hardest time. So please, if you are interested, go look up at the various trial areas. The Royal Navy really likes various points off the north coast of Scotland, etc. And look at where the trial zones are, and what the normal charts are, and where the usual currents and winds are from. It's even more fun if you have a long enough trial zone that you run into 2 or more currents. Now, you cannot, of course, test the ship in a storm. Everyone would see through that. You cannot test the ship in those sort of adverse conditions when you're doing a speed and efficiency trials. But, as said, even a small current, even a 2 to 3 knot current, let alone a 5, 6, 7 knot current, can have an effect on your performance through the water. Now, this is just some of the fun stuff. We are literally on slide 5 of 16, but it's worthwhile going back and thinking, okay, so where are the first crew involved in this? Well, usually by the time you get to the point at which you're doing these sort of trials and commissioning, you're dealing with a commissioning crew, not the first crew. So there is a transition at points. And you might notice we haven't got anywhere near the various systems you're going to get for the sensors and all these things. But don't worry, you've got maneuvering trials coming up, and maneuvering trials are probably the most fun, because you might think, well, speed and efficiency, especially if I'm doing against current, that's going to test my maneuvering, that's going to test my controls. Oh, no. You want to do a zigzag? You want to do a crash stop in a ship? And that is, by the way, a crash stop is a beautiful test of your steering gear, your hull strength, and your machinery. Because you slam the ship out of gear, basically. Slam everything into reverse to try and bring the ship to a stop as quickly as possible. Think about that again. You basically do the equivalent of, if you're driving a manual, putting on the clutch as hard as you can, slipping the gear into reverse, letting the clutch off, and using that to brake you. Think about doing that in your car. And now think about doing that in a 30,000-ton ship. Anyone think it sounds fun? It's also a good way, by the way, to lose your lunch. It is an experience which you have to go through to truly understand. I swear it is the closest to a G breakdown you will ever experience. And if you want to do it on a really big ship, the bigger it gets, the more dramatic it gets. You will literally slam into things. Do you know what I mean? For a car, that's an expensive method of blowing up the gearbox, clutch, and engine. It is a fun scenario. And by the way, with the maneuvering, zigzagging, one of the things they did with these ships, HMS Ark and the other aircraft carriers in the period, was they tried to see how hard and how fast they could zigzag. They were literally testing them to see if they could make them roll over. And at one point, during her testing, they apparently attempted a crash stop while she was mid-zigzag. So they were doing a crash stop while the ship was already at this angle. I'm told by the account I read, that it was a significant stomach event, let alone a significant emotional event for the crew. But this is the point. Maneuvering at sea, you have not got the same friction you have on land to stop. You don't have the same braking options. Your braking maneuver, by the way, if you're thinking on it, is actually brakes on your, on your shaft, the propeller shaft. That's how you tend to brake and slow a ship down slowly. You take off power, you apply a brake, possibly on the shaft, and you slow yourself down that way. That takes a long time to stop. That's far better for the engines, far better for make everything happy for yourself, but it's not exactly a really good system if you need to brake very, very quickly, because again, you don't have the friction. This is why you shove the ship into reverse. It's so that you use your own propellers as your stopping force to try and slow you down. If you're not careful, you can actually end up going in reverse. It's all about control. It's all about finite control of the ship. It is an absolute demonstration of naval officers' skill and capabilities. It really is. It's also something which is, how do I put this politely, at certain points forgotten. Quite sensibly so. Because you can break your ship doing it. It's trials like this, the maneuvering trials, the speed efficiency trials, which actually can break ships. There are historical examples of ships going out for these trials, being broken and heading back, and then not being commissioned for months, if not years. Some of them never commissioned. Again, if you want to go look into this more, go look at the lists, and I'm going to give you a quick hint. This is a quick research methodology. Right. So, when you're looking at ships which have been launched but not commissioned, and you can do this in books, you can do this with, well, honestly, you can do this with Wikipedia. And as I've said before, there are uses for Wikipedia. It's mainly the source list at the bottom. As an academic, I can't tell people to use Wikipedia as a list because you can't reference the authors. You don't know who to blame if the stuff in there is wrong. That's why academics don't like to use Wikipedia. But the Wikipedia, often, especially some of the well-researched articles, which you can usually tell, will have a very extensive source list at the bottom, which you can go through and you can use to gather information. And that is a good point to go with. Well, Wikipedia is also usually fairly accurate because of the people who are very geeky, and they are my people, so I am very supportive of them over people who, ships experiences, etc. You go through some lists of the large class of destroyers from World War II, and you'll look at some ships, and some ships get launched but never get commissioned. You want to look at why they're never commissioned. Some of them they stop funding them. But some of them fail the quality controls, but others literally fail at this point. And it's considered, do we take them back into dock, try and fix what's wrong with them, or do we keep on with the other ships we're building? Which is a better use of our time? If they're a cruiser or a battleship or an aircraft carrier, they're rare enough you're going to take them back into dock. There's no question asked. But a destroyer, you're building enough that suddenly you start going, well, hang on, which works out better here? Which is more efficient? To keep building the ships and to just get the others through, which are not going to have this problem, or to call them back, those in and try and fix them? Now, lots of ships also get lost on trials, but we prefer that not to happen. If the build quality and the first crew have done their jobs, the ship should not be in such a condition it doesn't come back from trials. And if they haven't been able to do their jobs, then there's been serious interference with them. Now we get to the systems check. Now, this again, the systems is fun. Part of the efficiency and the various maneuvering trials is as further checks of the systems. You'll do systems checks ashore, you'll do systems checks at sea. Everything will be checked multiple times before you get to sea. In fact, this is one of the reasons, one of the interesting questions I had with someone the other day was, why do we not date the engines the same as we date a ship's hull? We date a ship's hull, and therefore the ship's age, from the year it's launched. We date the engines from the point they are installed. Why? Because the engines on a ship, even once they're installed, will be tested. And they actually need to be run on a semi-regular basis to keep them in working order. So they will be run, potentially, before a ship's even launched. Before they're even hooked up to anything, they might be run. They will possibly be tested ashore and in a land facility, a land testing facility. They will be on all sorts of things with them. But they will be checked a lot. And it's not just the engines. You have navigation systems, you have fire control systems, and we'll get into the weapons and sensors later, but you have the various hydraulic systems on a vessel. You might well have air pumps. You might have... Well, let's be honest, let's go through the Diamantina, which I took these pictures from. There's all sorts of electrical systems, just including the base load, lights, etc., which need to be tested and need to be checked they're working. And if you don't check all this stuff, if it goes wrong for you out in the field, you're going to get into trouble. You're going to have major issues. So you have to test them. You have to get them to work. If you don't, you have a problem. If you do, woohoo, it's great. As Paul has just put it, engines on the ships have hours run rather than time in vessel. Yes. They will often have little dials, the same as you get as a mileometer on your car, which will show hours run. Now, there's a debate in some of the designs as to whether these systems need to be updated and are made digital, completely digital, or whether you leave the traditional methodology as well, mechanical one. I quite like having both. I like having a digital system and a mechanical system, because then you have a backup. If one's wrong, you have a backup. If there's a difference between the two, you have a reason to ask a question. And the thing is, if people try to break one or the other, it will be revealed by there being a difference between the two. And it's important to have an accurate idea for hours used, because that's going to set your maintenance schedule for your ship and for your engines. Again, two main reasons ships end up going back for major refits. It's engines and their subsystems basically being in trouble, and it's hull. For anyone wondering why some Type 23s couldn't be recommissioned and were basically stopped work of during their life extension, it was because looking at the hull, you realised you couldn't do anything. Yeah. Ships, like submarines, have a hull life. Although, in terms of submarines' hull life, they're measured in terms of diving. And dives they can do. But all these systems are a part of the process. With that being said, we've now reached Shameless Book Plug point, and I will, as always in this point, point out that the patron suggestions for April have gone live. They are live. There have been tweets and things about them. So anyone with topic suggestions, please go to Patreon and please add your suggestions. It'd be really nice to have plenty of suggestions there. I'd like to get it live as soon as possible, because I need 25 suggestions in there for it to go live as a Patreon vote. Also, for some reason, I'm currently getting, and I do not know why, a whole load of emails from... this is the trouble. I was clicking across to Discord, and I'm suddenly getting a whole load of emails from estate agents. We bought our house and been in it for nearly 2 years. Why am I suddenly getting this now? Why am I suddenly getting this now? I'd like to know why I'm suddenly getting this attention now. That's kind of weird. That's very weird. I wasn't expecting to be getting this attention right now. That is really weird. Now, with that being said, get rid of that and open up the Discord server for the questions. Okay, questions. Right, let's do... Yep, that's beard. That's working. How old is Raleigh? Today, Raleigh is 8. Which I'm fairly certain translates to 56 in dog years, 8 in human years. He's a good boy. He's a very good pupper. And he's mostly had a good day. Far too many builders around, though. Haven't been able to do just some of the stuff with him I'd like to have done today. So does King George V and HMS Prince of Wales show why testing before a ship commissions is important? Yes. They also show why rushing things just because a war is on is silly. But one of the problems you have in their case is because they were delayed by Churchill's decision and they're rushing to catch up. And it's another of those knock-on things of Churchill's decision. And I know there are lots of people who don't like me yapping on about it being Churchill's decision. They go, no, there's all these factors. There are lots of factors here, but the thing is, they were managing to deal with all those other factors and were working on it. The infrastructure was croaking, but it was working. The industry was creaking, it was growing to life. All these things were working, and then pause. It's terrible. I don't know. It's just... It didn't need to happen. No, Raleigh is 8, not 18. He's younger than John Moon. You're adding about a decade onto his age. Channel. What's the craziest trial report you've run into the archives? Okay. So, This was not in the UK National Archives. This was in, I think it's Glasgow Archives, one of the Glasgow Archives. Again, I've got to visit these archives soon. There was a report on a destroyer commissioning and trials testing, and they had a young destroyer officer acting as its captain, testing it and putting it through testing. And destroyer captain acted as you would expect a destroyer to. So, brand new destroyer. Slammed into a target buoy, actually. And managed to damage itself. They fixed the destroyer, they got it fixed. It worked. It served in World War II quite well. But, yeah. That officer went to have a career in the Royal Navy destroyers, which would be unsurprising, does involve at least 2 occasions of ramming. But yes, that was not unusual. The destroyers did take it to the nth degree of risk. Yeah, you will find pretty much all my dogs, quite a lot of my dogs in. Yeah. Glenn's definitely put the corgis in there. He might have put Raleigh in there. He does quite like my dogs. He has cats himself. He has cats himself, but he does quite like my dogs. He likes hearing the stories anyway. But yes, this one had rammed into a buoy. There was also the one which managed to reverse into the dock because they tried to do a crash stop almost immediately they started. Because you might as well. You could have to do the crash stop at any point. So do the crash stop when you're literally have just left the pier. And are just sort of getting away from the pier dockside, just getting away from the dock, and they did it, and they ended up going backwards into it. These things happen. Wayne's World of Science Tech. What does Argentina need in a navy today? Not really on topic, but I'll answer it. Some decent frigates. Realistically, they need some decent frigates, and they need to probably develop themselves. They've got some capabilities, but they have got a lot of older ships which have basically been broken down. And they need to almost build up the navy from scratch. So some decent frigates, some decent patrol ships, and grow from there. Have time periods of testing increased as ships have gone more complex? Answer this one earlier. We're going through. Calvin Gaswick, what is the most striking difference of testing the same thing? Speed test, fire hazard, shock test, whatever, between navies you know of? Okay, I'm not going to name names on navies. But one navy tested the firefighting abilities of a ship and how you could fight fires by actually lighting a fire, and everyone else usually just sets off smoke bombs. But there is one navy which still to this day, by tradition, and you can try and figure out which navy it is not the Royal Navy, which actually does light fires to test the initial firefighting skills while the ship's going through testing. The rest just used variations on a smoke bomb. As I understand it, I think there's only one. If you do find out there's multiple, I will be slightly shocked. Shock tests usually are basically the same. You have an explosion that sort of go off nearby. Chris Hietzuman, 63060. 6360. With new materials and building, do you think ships will use different methods of construction other than traditional keel and rib arrangement? Interlocking honeycomb, for example? They certainly have tried it at various points. But so far, what we've tended to find is that the keel rib methodology makes for a ship which is through life easier to maintain. And that's one of the things. It's not just about building a ship. It's about being able to maintain it and repair it and, if necessary, cut bits out of it later on. Honeycomb structures, etc., to be really strong, have to be interlocking, which makes it far more difficult to take them apart and put them back together again should they be damaged. It makes them more difficult to damage in the first place, but it makes them more difficult to repair them once you've got them. And therefore, your ship construction is always a balance of what is the most sensible build to do and affordable build to do versus what is the easiest to repair longer term. And you have to balance those two things. It's fun. Alright, no, the Royal Navy doesn't light fires on board. The Royal Navy does not light fires. As I said specifically, it's not them. They use smoke. They use smoke bombs. I think they might have been the earliest to change over to smoke bombs rather than small lit fires. Steve. Submarine trials. Okay, yes, you're well aware of Fetus and hurt there as a led to a thing. What changed your interest in the Royal Navy for submarine trials post the accident? Once they had the Fetus lock in place, they carried on trials much as they had beforehand. And you have to remember, Fetus being sunk in trials in that scenario was actually quite rare. It hadn't really happened before, or at least hadn't been proved to be the case before. But the thing is, submarine trials are always try to be conducted in a way which makes them survivable. And realistically, the Royal Navy, if they'd had their choice, would have made a submarine testing facility which would include a place where the submarine could go underwater and it would not get into it would be able to be basically lifted out should there be any issues, to stop it sinking and damaging itself. Realistically, there is a reason why quite a lot of submarines do their first dive test right next to the dockyard. They often do all sorts of tests before they go out to sea, but so did Fetus. She did tests. She passed the tests. They then went out to do more advanced trials, and that's when the problems hit. So realistically, it's more a case of it's something. Trials tend to be solved, and the issues in trials tend to be solved by design solutions. Because if trials reveal a major problem, it's usually a design issue, or occasionally an operational issue. Yeah, that's one of the fun things of shock trials. As Phil Williams had brought up shock trials on the on Beaver, all the boardroom heads doors were ripped off. The petty officer steward told the officers to sit with a smile or wait till Devonport. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. And knowing most officers, they just sit with a smile. Because there's just no point. Life happens and you need to use the facilities. But realistically, again, one of the problems you have with a lot of these testing is you're testing with something which is inherently dangerous. Diving beneath the water, inherently dangerous. This is the difference in warship trials to trials with a certain regular merchant ship. One is being tested to go into a scenario where human beings are actively adding to the threats against it. The other one is being tested just to deal with the scenario of the sea actively trying to kill it. Gentlemen, if a destroyer fails the trial, assuming it's not armed or has been disarmed, by the civilian, would make a nice hull for a private yacht. You could do, I suppose. Be rare you'd get it, but you could do. And that being said, we finished the questions. So we'll put this sign up. And we'll go to the next one. So sensors and electronics. Now this can be really, really fun because sensors and electronics often have to be tested at various different points. You have the testing during the design phase, when you will be testing out the systems. This is a good example. This is the Type 45 at Porton Down. If you go to Porton Down, you will see on the hill a Type 45 destroyer. And literally, it's sitting there because that's what they did the testing. They were testing systems. They were testing the masts and facilities. And they literally did testing on everything there. But if you go to the Isle of Wight, you will find an integration testing facility, which looks very similar. And the thing is, that's where they put the various sensors up in various places and tested if they worked before they went to sea. They tested they'd work before they're fitted to the ships. They test their work again. And then, once they're put on the ships, they're tested some more. And then they're tested operation at sea. Why? Because these systems are incredibly delicate. And if everything isn't set up just right, they will have problems. And those problems could be a gap in their field of the section, to a propensity to detect false images. False images which at the worst point could reveal your position because you could be firing to engage something which doesn't exist. Or at the other end of the worst point spectrum, could be presumed upon so much that you miss the enemy coming in because you presume it's just that glitch happening again. Best scenario, you find yourself wasting missiles. And so these systems have to be tested absurdly thoroughly in many ways. It's also usually the number one area people start to try and save money. So, for example, if you consider this system, right? This was built for the Type 45s. They've also sort of done a similar system with the new Type 23, new 23 fit / the Type 26 fit. They're not doing it with the Type 31s at the moment. And what's more is, a lot of the money that's being saved in terms of that is basically going, oh yeah, it'll be fine, these ships are going to operate as part of the task group. But if the sensors don't work together, if there are issues with the sensors, then those ships are going to suffer. The reality is, this costs money, it costs time, it costs personnel, it costs everything you don't want to spend. And yet, if you don't spend it, you're going to end up with a capability which really doesn't work. And that is a major issue. For Type 45s, when they were testing them out, again, if you want to go look at Porton Down, you can do. Go and measure the distance between those systems at Porton Down and those on the actual Type 45. That's how important the testing is for these things. Also, I would argue that potentially one of the most powerful radars two of the most powerful radars actually in the UK on land. What always disturbed me about Porton Down is, considering how full radar suite they have there and all the systems they have there, why they didn't stick in a silver A50 VLS and some Sea Vipers. I know technically the land version is called something different. It's not Sampat, it's the other one, isn't it? Why they didn't do that and commission that as a land destroyer, I will never know. Because that would have been a really useful asset to have, sitting above Portsmouth, able to protect quite a large chunk of the southeast coast and the channel, and provide oversight of missile defence. But they didn't. Thank you, Cowderface. Thank you for the cool shirt line. As it's someone's birthday, I wore someone else's the t-shirt today to make them happier. I think it worked. Again, it's similar with the Isle of Wight, and it's similar with various other positions. If you're going to test this stuff out and build it anyway, I'm not sure why they don't make some synergies in them and use them for various defences of the UK, but they don't. They don't. So now into weapons testing. And weapons testing will test the loading mechanisms, the resupply mechanisms, the firing mechanisms, the storage mechanisms, the coordination of everything. Okay? So, yeah, since you have machinery, you have everything working, you know your ship works, now you're going to test the weapons. And you do all this before you do the shock testing. We'll get to the shock testing in a bit, but it's one of those things which you have to do first. You have to establish a baseline. Before you can do shock testing and work out whether the shocks broke things, you have to test everything else. Now, this, of course, is a lovely Iowa class testing her 16-inch guns, and doing so in a way which practically would probably never otherwise would be done, firing her salvos. Very rare in Iowa has fired her salvos in anger, so the testing is some of our best pictures, and you get to see the full disturbance of the movement, of the ship and of the water around it. And this is where we get the ideas of this is how far a ship moves when it fires. This is also a scenario where we start to work out going, okay, so can we fire the 5-inch guns while firing the 16-inch guns? Because whilst on paper you can, in theory you can, according to your testing or according to your theoretical works. And remember, computer-developed testing is relatively new in ship design testing. We've been doing ship testing for a lot longer than there's been computers. Believe it or not, most ships used to go on shakedown cruises, commissioning cruises, and that's when a lot of the testing would take place, and that included in the age of sail. So you would have a first-rate ship of the line, etc., go on such a test. It was important it be tested. It was essential it be tested. If it wasn't tested, you get in trouble. Because things might go wrong in the field, and then you'd really be mucked up. So you need these things to be tested out. You need them to be properly put through their paces. Now, when I talked about systems, I didn't mention aviation facilities, and often they're tested in the earlier point. Can aircraft land? Does the landing system, all those things. But once you have weapons included as well, that actually adds another dimension to it, because you have to start testing your ability to coordinate those weapons with other things. Because let's say you are able to launch missiles based off data received from an outside source. You need to check that data's coming in and check it works on the computer systems. Because nowadays you have a whole let's put it this way, whole forests of code that could go wrong. One little branch in all the forest of code could be just badly written or have a small mistake in it, have a knot in it, and the whole thing could go wrong. Guys, wasn't there at least an RNSO's cat which sets on the main battery gun during firing? There have been all sorts of interesting creatures in the Royal Navy service. Yeah, it's just that's a whole other year of naval history. The pets which have gone to war at sea. But the most important thing with weapons, though, it's not firing whether they hit the targets. Why? Here's the fun thing. In weapons testing, they almost expect you to miss the majority of the time. Because everyone's learning from scratch. The gunnery crew, the training crew, all these things. Admittedly, with the modern computer systems, etc., they do expect you to hit. But again, they're often refining those. So the first in class, you'll often get headlines going, "Brand new destroyer misses target." They actually almost certainly do rig some of the tests to make sure that they hit enough that it doesn't show up as that. But yeah, the first ones they're going to have problems with. Because it's going to be new crew doing the fire control and the coordination of that. You're going to have new missiles, a new ship, new silos, new communication systems, new radar, everything connecting up and hoping it works sort of for the first time as it probably should do. And you're going to have issues. You're going to. There are squidgy organic bits in the mess. You're going to have issues. Squidgy organic bits often cause trouble. They often do. And finally, we're on the shock test. Once you've established a baseline of everything is working, broadly speaking, and we know what's going on with stuff, this is when we start going, okay, let's go do a shock test. Now, shock test is pretty much testing everything to just short of destruction. So you're going to use the biggest explosive device you can possibly justify to put the most amount of shock into a vessel. You'll notice that the explosion goes off near the vessel, not underneath it or on top of it, but actually just near it. Because literally it's a shock test. It's a, we're not going to sink you, but we're going to do everything but test. Again, there's a lovely video for this. I'm not sure I mentioned the earlier video, but I will do. For full video, go to the French Navy resumes full ship shock trials. It's on Naval News' YouTube channel. It's worth seeing. It's a big boom, and it's a very interesting time for the ship. Again, shock trials will often break stuff. It's more a case of working out what they don't break and what you're expecting them to break versus what you weren't expecting them to break. And if they break more of what you weren't expecting them to break then it's really acceptable, then you're in trouble. Thomas, when you say new radar, new computers, do you mean newly built or new types of things? Both. Both. Let me explain that one, okay? Hello, gorgeous. I'm going to get another iron brew. Okay? Good boy. You keep everyone amused for a second. Why haven't you eaten your food today? You should eat your food during the day, Thomas. You're starting to become a vampire. You're eating everything at night. And not eating during the day. Is it because there's too many people around? Do you not like all the people in your house? Is that it? It'd be better when they're all down here doing this end of the house, and they're not up at your bed end of the house. Will you be better then? Probably not, thank you. They'll still be disrupting the Ralsonian calendar. Now, ships usually go through shock trials, and then they go back to the builders and various people to check them over, fix whatever's been broken, maybe fix things which weren't supposed to be broken so they won't break again. And yeah, then you commission them normally. It's rare you break them. This is not a sink-ex, okay? There is a difference between a sinking exercise and a shock trial. Sinking exercise, you are literally trying to sink a ship to learn about sinking the ship and to demonstrate those skills and train those skills. A shock trial, you're closer to break the ship as much as you can without sinking it. And why does this also come with new build or new radar, new computers? And why does that also count? Is because if you've got a new build, I'm getting into this, we'll be talking about manuals in a bit. You will have a series of checks to do against the first in class, compared to first in class. But things might have changed. Some might have had a bright idea, mightn't they? They might have had a bright idea. It might be a good idea, it might be a bad idea, but it's certainly a bright idea, and they might have changed some things. And this means you need to change again what you're doing and how you're going to approach stuff. So this is one of the problems that comes up with ships, especially in today's build program, where you can get a lot of ships, where the ships you get built are often going to have significant gaps between them, which means you are going to get changes. There's the classic example for me of the Astute class submarines, which are pretty much two classes of three, because there were so many differences between the last three and the first three. You've got your big boner. You do realize this is almost as big as your head. You still want bickies. You always want bickies. There's also the scenario that things like the technology might change. The example I give on this is last year I spec'd out a gateway for our solar panel system. Okay? We're getting a full island build. We're getting roughly 17, 18 panels. We're getting about a 32 kilowatt battery system. We're getting a full gateway system, right? Okay. Well, it's not going to be installed till probably this year. So by the time we get to installation, there's going to be new solar panels out, which are probably going to be about the same price as the ones I was buying by last year. They're going to be more powerful. So that's going to change some of the power settings. The batteries, there's a new version of them come out, which are really nice. Again, slightly more expensive, but actually roughly the same price. There's about £5-10 per battery involved in it. I have to buy 4 of them, so that's going to be 50 quid difference. But again, they're going to give me slightly more efficiency. So again, that's going to be a case of, okay, how's this going to affect the system versus what I expect for? And there's a brand new gateway system, which takes, again, costs a little bit more, not much more, but is based around the new requirements. That's in a year. That's a solar island project, a household island solar battery project. Okay? Nothing too massively fancy. Imagine how radar systems can change in a year. Now have 2 years or 3 years between installation and build. They could be the same radar type, could be the same specification, but you've been operating it for a couple of years, maybe on an earlier version, or it's taken part in a combat operation, and you've now got things you're going to change inside it to improve it, to make it better, more resilient, more helpful. So it might be using the same radar, but it might not be the same radar. So new build, new radar, it might not be a new radar, as in a brand new radar system, but it could well be a new radar. And again, you have to test these things. There's some fun going on here. So since I know that fighters do have individual personalities despite their production compared to ships, actually warships do the same on steroids. Yep. Because you have to remember, a warship is a collection of systems. It's a collection of server farms these days, all surrounding a very big power plant, all wrapped up in a metal box, which has weapons poking out the top, and propulsion out the bottom, and which are festooned within that and around all those things are the abilities for humans to live. That is a modern warship. Okay? So those things change. Now we have the commissioning crew. And again, I use Atrius Greenland as an example of this. Okay? Here's a fun thing. Commodore Jerry Kidd, who had been the last commander of HMS Illustrious, the Royal Navy the Royal Navy sort of Invincible class aircraft carrier. I think it was Illustrious. I think it was Lusty he was in charge of. I'd have to check that up, but I think it was Lusty. He was the guy who saw her decommissioning and took part and looked after her, and he was considered a very, very good ship captain. And he'd been promoted to Commodore. He was responsible for all sorts of things. And one of the things he was responsible for was commanding the search and overseeing the search for the first commanding officer to command the commission of HMS Queen Elizabeth. Okay? So, he runs a commission. I think it lasted for a year, had multiple meetings. And the result of this commission found that the perfect officer, the most qualified officer, the best officer to be the captain, the commissioning captain of HMS Queen Elizabeth and to write the Bible, aka the ship's manual of operations, for her and for the rest of the Prince of Wales and for the class to come, was Commodore Jerry Kidd, who would, as it's per the better at this time, would call himself and present himself as a captain for the purposes of his time aboard her. Now, let me put it this way. His later part of his XO, I think, was good enough that he was one of the ones who ends up becoming the commissioning officer, the commissioning captain for HMS Prince of Wales. We'll leave that to one side. It's a really good system, you know. The Royal Navy got an absolutely excellent officer to command the commissioning, and one does wonder, to an extent, if First Sea Lord saw this coming, and saw this as a way to keep him busy till he was available for the role, and had literally kept him around for the role, because Jerry Kidd is... How do I put this politely about Jerry Kidd? He's one of those officers who really should have got more senior than he did. I think he retired as fleet commander in 2021. And his final year of service was 2022. He is currently 58 years old. And the fact that he didn't go on to more senior posts in the Royal Navy is kind of a reflection of the very good officers we had available at that point. The Royal Navy was rather a glut of good quality admiral officers. But he retires as a vice admiral. He retires as a vice admiral and fleet commander. He then went on to serve as Governor of Jersey. I'm not sure if he's still in the role. I don't think he is. He is incumbent. So he's incumbent till 2027. So he's currently in charge. He's currently running Jersey, which is not a bad role to have. Let's be honest. It's quite a nice job to have if you can there. But honestly, he would have been very useful in other roles. And if you consider as fleet commander, and that was his last role of the Royal Navy, current gentleman in post is a guy called Steve Morehouse. Phil Jones had done the role before him, and went on to become First Sea Lord. So George Zambalis, Ben Key had gone on to become First Sea Lord, and Jerry Kidd is the guy who comes after Ben Key. So you would have expected him to also go on to a senior position. Currently I think Andrew Burns is one of the officers on the list for various interesting things for the Royal Navy, and he is a successor to him. And so it's kind of an unusual situation. But no. as the commissioning crew, he takes part in writing the first ship's manual, which does tend to become the class manual, and going through all the testing. So he goes through all the testing reports. He's operating the ship. He's producing as the commissioning crew, they are writing down what will become the guideline for operations of the ship going on. Its standards operation. You wonder, if you've ever been aboard a ship, you'll often find documents which are basically standards operations, which are, this is how you do maintenance on X. This is how you do Y. This is how you do... Those are all compiled from the various guides provided by the manufacturers, but also it's then adapted by the first crew into a manual. And that's the commissioning crew. They take the notes from the building crew, from the people who are the first crew, the people who are aboard, and then the commissioning crew turn it into operational procedures. Because you might have a theory for how you do something, but how do you do that when you're at sea carrying out aviation operations in a certain level of strength of gale? Or a sort of heavy winds and heavy seas. How do you carry out those operations in that circumstance? What do you do? How do you brace yourself? How do you position yourself? So all sorts of guides and standards for operations. A lot of the Clarke ship's culture will be developed under this process. And yes, after every major refit and modernization, they will have to redo this. So the trials take place not just after your commissioning, but also after every major refit and modernization. And they'll do minor trials after every minor refit. They'll do tests to check things are still working. And again, they'll be compared to the baseline notes. They'll be compared to the standardization forms and the standard operations. So the commissioning crew is really disturbingly important in some ways for what they do and for how little there's often discussed about them. But selecting them is considered a pretty important role. They'll also, and again, remember this, he commands his ship from May 2016 to October 2018. So he takes Queen Elizabeth through all sorts of her firsts. All sorts of her first positions. He's basically also, therefore, the person responsible for how will she operate with others. How do you operate with others? Because a lot of the trials up to now have been about her operating solo, the ship operating solo, how the ship herself runs. And a lot of tests, even on a major capital unit, tests might be done with security, in fact they often are going to be done with security, will not have tested quite how she works with everyone. Everyone is working with her, rather than her working as part of a team. Okay, there's a difference. Think about it this way. In the workups up till now, she is basically the star performer. She is, let's give an example, Taylor Swift. Okay? She's Taylor Swift. The other ships there, they're her security team. Taylor can dance around, do whatever she likes. The security team moves and responds to that. They are there to look after her, not to work with her, although they are her friends and to an extent colleagues. They are there to look after her. Her needs are paramount. Their needs don't really their needs come into it only so much as she wants to consider them. She gets to decide. She decides. If she's a very generous person, she'll be very nice to them. If she's not a very generous person, well, they're getting a paycheck, and they'll decide. They'll probably vote with their feet at some point. But the moment you get into real combat operations, suddenly you can't afford to have that. Yes, your carrier is important. Yes, it's the centerpiece of the task group, but it has to work with everyone else. If the ASW ship says, no, you cannot go in that direction, I think there's a submarine there, guess what? You can't go in that direction, because there could be a submarine there. And it's that ASW ship's job is to keep you alive and keep the task force operating, and they are the expert on that. So if they say submarine, maybe threat there, you don't go there. They don't try it, they don't adjust. This is not a peacetime training, this is exercises for wartime operations. And in wartime, you don't do it. And in wartime in exercises, again, you do not go, right, and we're going to go to high speed for a high-speed trial here to operate or test aircraft takeoff under full speed conditions. You're going to look at, where is my destroyer? Can I do that? Am I still in the air defense envelope? Am I still going to be protected if I do that? Have I warned the rest of the task group? So this is the thing. This is exercise and operations, how you integrate. How you become one part of the force become really important. How do you work with other partners? One of the interesting things that we found out quite early on with the Queen Elizabeth class, and that happened a lot, was initially a lot of, because they are, again, Stoffel carriers, the urge of a lot of nations was, when they were turning up, was to have them practice with their LHDs. Because they also do Stoffel operations. It made sense. But quickly, one of the things that starts happening is, if you have them exercising with your LHDs, they then become a very dominant part of that exercise. Why? Because whilst your LHDs might be there as the main force of the thing, because they're delivering the Marines, the carrier has the best fleet command facilities, and the carrier has the best air combat and air strike capabilities. So they start to dictate things, and very quickly, if a Queen Elizabeth class is there as part of an LHD group, it becomes the dominant ship in the LHD group. It becomes the coordinating ship. And that can be tolerated by some allies, they don't mind it. Other allies find that more problematic. Okay, so let's work it out with another carrier. The interesting thing there is that almost every time a Queen Elizabeth class has turned up, let's say we operate with an American carrier, the British carrier ends up becoming the air defense coordinator. Why do you think the British carrier becomes the air defense coordinator? It's kind of like World War II. But why do you think the British carrier becomes the air defense coordinator? Anyone want to guess in the chat? I know. It's now time for the poodle's bedtime. It's 9:05. The Ralsonian calendar has spoken, it is bedtime. But no, they want to watch a movie. It's your birthday. You're staying with me. Anyone in the chat want to put forward an idea of why do they think the Royal Navy carrier becomes the air defense ship? To an extent, Lions have a focus on maintaining a small number of aircraft continuously rather than a larger group in strike role. To an extent, you have that, but that's not actually the right reason for this, but it's a good idea. Better radars? Not really. Again, usually the American carrier is still providing the Hawkeyes, and their Hawkeyes are still the dominant in the air warfare, but there is a different reason. Anyone? The pub? No. So, here's the thing. If you're launching fighter aircraft and they're going off light, so they're going off fast, the advantage of a Stoffel versus a Catabar operation is you do not have to reset the catapult. So you can just stream aircraft off in air defense. So if you want to do a rapid launch of air defense fighters to assist the defense, the Stoffel system works better. So for this scenario, when you're operating with an American carrier, the American carrier is very good at the strike role. It's very good at lots of things, but it can't ripple fighters off as quickly as the Queen Elizabeth class can. So if the Queen Elizabeth maintains the reserve fighters, the ready alert fighters, and helps with the cat, but maintains the alert fighters, that's a really good use of its particular skill set. Because it can ripple off fighters that much quicker, because it doesn't need to reset its catapults. Whereas the US carriers carry more aircraft, they can more easily organize and coordinate strikes, and they can usually produce a far heavier strike, because again they've got Catabars, so they can tend to load up aircraft to far heavier to do long range strikes. It allows by the RN carrier taking on the fighter role, it allows the USN carrier to focus on it and deliver heavier strikes. So it works out as that way, in spacing. And also they have fairly similar command staff in terms of numbers and capability and coordination and practice. The British did take a 10-year gap. It has taken us, it's still taking us time to rebuild because we didn't order F-35Bs fast enough because we were silly. And the issues we had, but it still has been sensible. So it works out, yeah. All these things add up. But if you are wanting to ripple launch, the Stovall system actually has an advantage. And I know that's unusual because if you say usually they're presented as a binary system of Cadabar best, then Stobar, then Stovall, and all these things. But actually, all systems have relative advantages and disadvantages. Stobar is probably considered the best for air defense because it allows the heaviest fighters can take off quickly because they don't have catapults, but they also can land heavy. This is one of the reasons why the Royal Navy has got the rolling landing system going for the F-35. So they do a rolling landing. Basically, the Royal Navy has reintroduced the landing process they used for Swordfish and aircraft like that back in World War II. But it works. Now again, there's other scenarios of how they operate together. And I will get into this more, but I'm just going to take the person who's poking me quite a lot to go in the garden and see if that makes him happy for a few minutes, because it is his birthday. So I'll be back in a second, but I'm just going to put him in the garden. Come on, Poodle. Come on, Poodle. It's your birthday. Not that you're not demanding when it's not your birthday, but it's your birthday, so, you know. Huh? Oh, birthday boy wanted to go garden. No, I haven't. I'll wait. Yes, he's been enjoying it. Oh. He can't go in the garden yet. There is a corgi who is... How do I put this politely? In a little bit of a fractious mood after a whole section of ceiling fell on him out in the garden. A little bit of a fractious mood. I wish I owned vast amounts in Lockheed, Rolls-Royce and BAE. That'd be useful. Anyway, with this case, in the scenario, the other thing that you found with the Queen Elizabeths, in terms of their integration operation, is that their radar systems and sensors, because they are higher up, the Royal Navy's actually found them useful in that if you have them running, they provide a slightly further horizon, which is very useful for assisting ships like frigates, etc., with keying in their weapons. For example, the Type 23s, as large as they are very small compared to the Type 45s, let alone the Queen Elizabeth. Which means they comparatively have a closer horizon in terms of their radar range. So if you can key off ships like the Queen Elizabeth, you can actually launch your your Sea Scepters slightly earlier. Gentlemen, they can be in the garden together. It's just not advisable when you know one's already in a bad mood. And that's what's way. Zebedee and Raleigh are both on medications at the moment. Raleigh's on steroids and stuff for his ears because of an ear infection, and Zebedee's on stuff as well. And so when they've had a bad day, like something's dropped on them, we tend to try and avoid in the evening them going in the garden together when it's darker and we can't keep as good eye on them, because stuff could happen and we'd rather just not have to run the risk. Rather not run the risk. And as I've just been reminded, there's also the other problem in the garden, which is there's the mouse out there, which Zebedee likes to chase and doesn't like anything else involved in the chase of. Ah, well. Shall I just give you biscuits and see if that works instead of you wanting to go and garden? Will this make you happy? You're still going in the garden in a bit. You're still going in a garden. You are such a poodle. Now, this doesn't just go for aircraft carriers. There are lots of things you find out when you're doing the exercise and operations of how ships work together. One of the interesting things was when they started working out Type 45s together, how they interrupted, because the British were expecting them to interoperate in a certain way where they would buddy off each other, and it was found they actually sort of work better as slightly lone wolves, which occasionally assist each other, rather than necessarily in a buddy-buddy relationship. They are quite well designed for independent operations. This wasn't their original conception, but it's how they tend to work better in operations and how we work with them, which means they actually tend to be slightly further apart than we would have probably otherwise designed to operate. With the Arleigh Burkes, there is again an interesting thing of how do you integrate the Flight 3s with the Flight 2As, with the Flight 2s and the Flight 1s? How do you get them to work together? Because, believe it or not, they all have just different enough systems, even with modernization, that it makes things different and interesting to operate together. So you have a theory of how you're going to operate together, and then you have a reality of how you operate together, and how you work together. Again, exercise and operations are how we test this. This is part of ongoing testing, ongoing reality. This is often post-commissioning, and of course it's after you've got your first commissioning crew, but it is part of the process. It's part of the time they have to spend. And the thing is, you can't keep those Burkes in their own groups because they're taking on slightly different roles. The Flight 3s are very much supposed to stand up and replace the TCOs in some of their duties. And the reason they're supposed to do that is because they haven't got a cruiser replacement in service. The Americans have, again, not managed to commission a cruiser. As I will refer you to my earlier assessment, which I've stated many times, is that I'm half suspicious that the reason the new ship is being called a battleship is because what the US Navy really wants is a cruiser. They haven't been able to get a cruiser through Congress for about 30-odd years, and so they're going, well, let's just try calling it a battleship and see if that gets it through. You know, who never knows, it might work for them. It might work. There's always a chance. There's always a chance it doesn't work, but there's always a chance it does work. And then we have, writing the manual. Okay. So here is the thing. The first captain, the commissioning captain, will write most of the manual while he's aboard the ship. He or she is, I suppose, aboard the ship. They will write most of it with the crew, etc., and everyone there. However, they will tend to add on to it immediately after they leave the ship. They will spend some time in basically a quiet staff post where they get some time to think it through and work it through. The reality is, once you have all these things worked through, you need to not only include the things of what the ship, how you operate the ship, but also some of the culture of the ship, to start enshrining that culture, to start building a culture. You know, we know talk about ships being known as happy ships, ships being known as tough ships, ships being known as basically prison ships, where they get a load of people from basically out the Navy jails and all those things. Well, the way you try and hold it together to make them all as happy as you possibly can do is they each have their own individual culture, and that goes in the manual. That comes through those documents. And that's important because each ship needs its own character. Each ship needs its own personality and its own things. Now, turn to the chat, and we're going to be answering questions now for a bit afterwards, and then I'll be on Discord later. But to answer the question that's popped up in the chat from El Cid, why the frigate would you want to put a single F-35B on any ship thing? A single F-35B is no help. It's kind of like, okay, you have a single helicopter aboard for ASW operations, But that works in terms of providing the ASW because you work with other ships and the carrier in terms of providing that. And then when you're off on your own, well, a single helicopter can still be useful in terms of going and doing reconnaissance, putting people aboard ships and other things. A single F-35B it's great, it's an extra fighter, but you're going to need a lot more work on it than you need on a helicopter. You're going to need a lot more specialist crew aboard. You're going to need some more space for its maintenance. You need more space for its ordnance, because it's going to be differential. And you have one. And one fighter is never any use for anything, pretty much. It's just not helpful. And also, again, you're limited to vertical takeoff and landing. So you're limited to the most inefficient operation of that aircraft. Not the rolling taking off and rolling landing you can do on the carrier. Yes, you can still do vertical takeoff and vertical landing if you want on the carrier, and that's always useful as an extra bonus. Should you want to do a Ripple 6 where they all take off up in the same air, you can do that in theory. In practice, you just do a rolling one because it's going to be just as quick and it's going to get them off with more fuel and less strain on the engines and more weapons. It's one of those things which would look very good on a computer game. And it would look very cool, because you'd have a fighter you could send up. But the reality is, that's not going to work well for you. It's a scenario where it's better when you've got the F-35s and you've got 36 sitting on a carrier. If you've got 36 sitting on a carrier in the middle of your task group, that's far better than one or two, so one sitting on each of your 4 frigates you might have around you. If you have 4 frigates. And again, remember, we're talking about the Royal Navy, which is struggling to get the ships they're getting. They're going to have a gap. And the reason they're struggling to get the ships they're getting is because there has been no impetus for building for a long time. Again, we can look back to the Type 45 program and all the joy that happened with that. Designer program round 12, order 9, take delivery of 6. Type 26 program, where we are going to have at least lose 1 to the Norwegians, and that's going to be replaced in a successive batch. So we're going to get 1 of those delayed. Type 31 programs are going into Type 32 program, which they haven't announced yet. Type 83 program is going to follow on from the Type 26s. So if we don't have the Type 26s complete in time, that's going to delay them, which is going to be more dependent on Type 45s, which we already have 6 hulls which are overworked and under-maintained. And a single F-35 on a single frigate in the Pacific means you're going to cut down that frigate's ability for ASW warfare for absolutely no help at all against the Chinese in the Pacific. A single fighter is not really any help. If you just have to look at the operations of the MAC fighters in World War II and the various the CAM fighters as well, the catapults ones. Not many fighters, very small pool of aircraft, very quickly get into trouble. Very quickly I use it or lose it, or single shot assets. Because of the maintenance issues, because of the support issues. Again, you can do slightly more if you've got an LHD. LHD will allow you to carry more and operate more successfully. There are already enough other assets you can design to operate a useful number of fighters, that overloading your frigate arm by going, yeah, I'm going to do this, is going to cause you more trouble than good. If you've got 244 tin cans in your Canadian Navy, A, your Canadian Navy is massive, and B, why do you have that many and not have aircraft carriers and other things around to assist them? 24, rather. If you've got 24, then, again, it's better to have other systems to put them on. Probably if you're Canada LHDs. Probably considering their particular strategic scenario. probably want other, putting in a single F-35B fighter in them is not really going to help any of them. Also, the ASW helicopter gives them a lot more versatility in terms of their operations. All right, I'm going to try and put the poodle in the garden because hopefully the corgi has stopped his mouse chase by now. Hopefully. Because the poodle is complaining and would like to go garden. Darren? Yay! Raleigh to the garden. The poodle does not chase the mouse. Well, Chris Hat's Human 360. What are your drone fighters like? How big are they? Because if you're presuming your drone fighters are going to be very small compared to an F-35B, then their range is going to be quite small. And the weapons load they can take is quite small, so they're not really possibly going to increase the horizon of the destroyer that much. You might be better off with some uncrewed rotary assets to do that. To do that option. This is okay. Or you might be better off with something which can do airborne early warning for you, which could be a more simple asset than a fighter asset. In fact, something which do take your radar horizon, go up and provide a radar horizon, which is quite distant. It's probably going to be a lot easier than a fighter drone asset to produce, and you're going to be able to compare it and get away with 3 or 4 of them, and that provides you with far better coverage without needing for fighters. Because that just increases your sensor coverability and increases the horizon of your sensors, so your missiles can perform that much better. Yeah, a lot of these things are. You will see a lot of newspapers come up and articles go, well, fighter drones. Well, is the fighter drone the best solution for that situation? I would say for a destroyer, if I wanted to maximize its defensive capability, its reach, I'd go for an airborne early warning drone system. That would be better for me. In Canada. Oh, good. Even on his birthday, the Ralsonian calendar is still fixed in stone. Yes, Karen. I'm still live. Yes, Karen. Yes, Karen. Thank you, Karen. Why does it take them, Raleigh, a while to understand that sometimes I let you go and garden? Well, even when I'm live, because you need to go in the garden. They think because I've let you go in the garden, the video's over. It's not over. I'm still talking to you. Let's open the questions up, shall we? That makes the birthday boy disappear too much. Let's do that. And that. Are we concerned about seafloor-based mines and missiles? Well, missiles are nothing new, and seafloor-based mines are nothing new. Missiles we fought in 1982. Missiles we fought a lot. So they're nothing new. And seafloor-based mines, well, that's actually been a traditional mining technique. That's been around for a long time. There are various systems and various ways we approach them. Usually these days we're talking about uncrewed undersea assets to go and hunt them down. various systems. Let's see what comes up. Okay. Points, did they test the radar for the effects of VLS launch in severe weather conditions? Yes. That is quite a big part of testing to work out whether it works. You know, these things happen. Raleigh, behave. You'll be let through when they're available, ready to let you through. I know you have your calendar in mind, my little old man, but no. Okay. All right. The YQF-44. Okay, the Andorel. That's a £5,000. That's a 2.25 ton aircraft. It's 20 foot by 17 foot in wingspan. It's got a maximum speed of 0.95 Mach. It's able to take 2 AIM 120 AMRAAM, probably on its hard points. It's US Air Force development. Yeah, I am not really sure how. That's quite a big thing to fit on. You are not going to fit. You are not going to fit a dozen of those on a ship and be able to launch them. That thing also is not a vertical takeoff and landing. That is very much a well, it's half the size of an F-16, I suppose, theoretically. But it so far has only just had its first flight in the 31st October 2025. So, yeah, we'll see how far and what develops out of that. But I don't think, again, you're going to be able to put 24 of those on a destroyer and have the space for them. And that you can fill up a hangar with them. That's not that they're going to fill up a carrier. You know, one of the things I do expect to see is a carrier carrying at least a squadron of uncrewed assets. I do expect those sort of things to be operated from a carrier. I don't expect them to be operating from a destroyer. The destroyer will possibly get some uncrewed rotary assets, and as I said, we'll get some airborne early warning systems. But it hasn't got the space. It hasn't got a the flight deck space for those sorts of things to operate. And okay, maybe we do end up designing systems which can allow them to operate them. That's lovely. But I'll see, when that happens, we're not going to be talking about the next generation. We're not going to be talking about 20 years down the line or 30 years. We're probably going to be talking about 40, 50 years down the line. Because at the moment what we're hitting is a lot of low-hanging fruit with them. And there are options and there are things we can develop on their path. But also, there's also a cost-benefit analysis. Because if I want to shrink that capability so I can have that many, which LCD is putting forward 24, on a destroyer, how much space can they take up? They're going to have to be vertical launch technology. That's going to all make them very, very expensive. Okay? If you want to build smaller and have all the capability, it's going to be very expensive because you're going to have to shrink everything down, work everything out. If you build massive, it's going to be expensive capability. And also, again, if you want to have a meaningful range at which they start adding onto your range and give you enough to keep a presence and patrol out there, that's going to mitigate against them being that small as well, because of the amount of fuel they're going to have to carry. and the weapon systems you have to carry, and all the systems you have to have coordinating them and supporting them. And then you think about it, well, I'm going to need to carry, if I've got 24 of those, I'm going to need to carry operators for them in at least 3 shifts. So that means I'm going to need to have flight teams for all 24, because I could have all 24 airborne. And I'm going to need at least 2 of those, 2 sets of flight teams. So let's say each flight team is going to be 3 people, and let's say I need 24, so that's 72, so it's 144 personnel for just the flight team. Then I'm going to have the people who are going to do the maintenance on the drones and the assistance of those, which again probably means I'm going to need another, probably 120. So now I'm up to the point at which I have 264 people. Probably once it's all in, if I've got 24 drones like that on my ship, I've probably got an extra 280 people. And that's me lowballing it and on the back of, on a mental back of a piece of paper. Oh. Again, El Cid. So, you want mines which will stay hidden till you pass overhead. Again, magnetic influence mines on the seabed. That is, again, is nothing new. Again, we've been setting those off for quite a while. But there are other systems which are coming in, harmonic ones. I do realize it's more than just a magnetic influence one, but, you know, again, it's nothing too new. Hammerhead minis, thermite act, that's too late to avoid as you pass over them. Again, that's been the practice of a mine for a long time. I know it's built up as being this big, scary thing, but mines have been... The whole point of a mine has traditionally been you don't see it until it's too late and it goes off next to your ship. That is the modus operandi of a mine. And again, how do we deal with it? Well, we send in a mine hunter beforehand, a minesweeper, to sweep an area before the ships go in. We might use these days, those systems we might send in will be drones, uncrewed systems. You'll have little boats which go in, which can have systems which increase their magnetic resonance and their magnetic signature and their sonic signature and their sound and all those things to make them seem far bigger than they actually are. You can have all sorts of uncrewed assets scanning the seabed with various versions of active and passive sensors. And it's going to be a battle of technology and a battle of wills. They're going to put some good ideas forward. We're going to put some good ideas forward. And both sides are going to be competing. And that's the way it always has been. I realise there are a lot of articles. I've seen a fair number of articles myself recently which have been getting massively going, it's terrible, this new stuff is coming. But the main trouble is that a lot of the people who are writing the articles for the mines are trying to sell them. And the thing is, the people who are selling the countermeasures don't need to write those articles because the people selling the mines are making the case for them. So you'll often see a preponderance of information produced by companies talking about the mines and the threats to the mines, and less information about the countermeasures. Because the people writing about the mines make the case for the mines, and the people writing about the mines make the case for the countermeasures. So the countermeasure people can keep quiet. This is why you often see far more information published about the mines and the threat of them and how they make area than the countermeasures. But the countermeasures are there. And yes, China has been putting out their new toys and they have been wandering around. But so have our new toys been wandering around China. We're at peace, so you can. This is the joy of the sea when you're at peace. The oceans are global commons. Everyone can go everywhere, and the only way you can stop them is by running them over or sinking them, either which could be considered an act of war. So you have to just let them wander around, and you watch them, and you learn what they're doing. But does it make them really scary? No, not necessarily, because in wartime you can go and hoover them up. That's the thing. This is the point I sometimes try and make. In wartime actually makes naval operations simpler than peacetime. Because in wartime, you've got the option of, we can destroy them. In peacetime, you have to manage them. Basically, it's like if you're the boss of a company and you have some really annoying workers and you cannot fire them. That is the Navy in peacetime. I know there are questions coming in, but I was sort of dealing with something. Because Elsid is kind of, in the nicest way, not putting in questions properly and spamming the chat. But I think it's possibly their first time here. I haven't seen them in a while. So, you know. Calm guys, work. Again, here is the point. At the moment, the Western governments are starting to fund defense more. The Russians and Chinese keep making the case about how deadly and how threatening their missiles are, which is making the case for both them to try and sell them to people abroad, and, as far as the Western companies are concerned, for their interceptors to be bought. If they start publishing the information about their interceptors and how good and capable they are, then that might lessen the urgency of buying them. It's kind of like with the mines. Again, people making the offensive armaments and publicizing them do a lot of effort in their publicity campaign. Again, if you want to use a classic example in the UK, in European, what is the most publicized missile produced by Europe in the last decade? The one which is talked about the most. Is it the Sea Viper system and the various air defense missiles? No. It's the Norwegian Naval Strike Missile. You have to make the case for people to buy the offensive missiles. The people buy the defensive missiles because of the offensive missiles. One, you need to advertise and need to push and say how brilliant it is. The other, you can go, well, look how good they say that is. Don't you need a new missile? New version? Again, Elsid, again, be very careful of presuming these tech trees are US exclusive. I know a lot of US companies will claim they're US exclusive, but then you turn around and find out that they are produced in partnership with components from some European manufacturers. And there is often a big thing in America where they confuse whether it's BAE America or BAE UK, which is producing the components. The companies will go, well, I'm buying them from BAE America. Yes, but they are built in BAE UK, and etc. So they'll go, this is entirely American build. Yeah. And it's the same with BAE Australia and the engines. And it's some of the beautiful things, the stuff in the amount of stuff in AUKUS, which is boiled down to submarines, and it isn't just a submarine program. That's just one of many programs in AUKUS, including hypersonics and all sorts of systems. Yeah, that gets But anyway, I have proper questions coming in terms of questions coming into the system, so I'm going to get to those. Calm Gasberg. I know. Any news on integration of AIM-20 and NSM or similar ones on helicopters in the Navy? No. NSM maybe. AIM-20 unlikely. AIM-120 is... No. If you're a helicopter and you're shooting AIM-120, then you're basically firing because you're already dead. Do you need a subset of the trials as part of the working out process of the ship? Do you do a subset of the trials as part of working out process of the ship? How do I put this? One of the interesting things about quite a lot of ship's trials is you often get historians and academics invited along and journalists invited along to try and disseminate information and to provide extra viewpoints. But Trials. Have any of the exercises I've been on been trials? None of them have been theoretic. None of the exercises I've ever been on have been trial ones. I think that's usually more senior academics than me. Professors. Those sort of people. Bigger dogs than me. Is Powder Monkey working for you, Lions? Jonathan Moon's question test has got through. So, yeah. Questions are working. Questions are coming through. And I'll do 15 more minutes of questions, and I will go make sure the birthday boy is happily gone to bed, and then I'll be turning up in Discord for a bit to say hello and chat away to people. But I have a lot of builders around here tomorrow, and I have to record before I go to bed. Well, re-record, because the sound is terrible, because it's ruined by a load of... basically about... there's a drill noise appeared, which I didn't detect myself, but which apparently was detected by microphone. And tomorrow's video is a key books one, and it is 4 generations of American naval theorists, starting off with Roosevelt, Mahan, Sims, and B.J. Armstrong. Yes, the question prompt. Ooh, let's go to... that system. Let me see if I can find that one. Oh. Let's see. Version message. Yeah, it is there at some point. Even out of the Master Shadows. And I think it's there you go. That worked. That's how you cut questions in. Which one? B.J. Armstrong is no relation to you. That's a shame. I think you'd like him. I think you would. No, a Merlin with 4 AMRAAM is not a nice addition to a Missile Defense Edition. A Merlin with 4 AMRAAM is a Merlin which isn't doing his job of hunting submarines and dealing with mine threat and other things. A Merlin with 4 AMRAAM is not doing its job. That's one of the problems with some of the things that come through and the ideas that come through. They're great, they're lovely, bright ideas, but then you think about going, well, if the Merlin's going around with AMRAAMs on instead of torpedoes and sonobuoys, then it's not doing its job of hunting submarines. And I have those helicopters because I need them to hunt submarines. If I want something to play fighter aircraft, that's why I want more F-35Bs. I've got them. They're a far better fighter than the Merlin will ever be. So I should carry more of those. And this is, again, something you get into procurement quite a lot, because this is where a lot of the bright ideas come from. People start going, well, it'd be nice to have this. It'd be nice to have this. And it's a lovely idea to have, but an each case scenario where that's a benefit versus just letting that system do the job it's supposed to do and actually having the proper system to do that the other job is so rare as why? Why in any scenario where if I'm operating against China in the nicest way, I'm not going to be operating as a single ship, I'm going to be a task group strength. Why would I want my Merlins to not be doing the anti-submarine warfare job, considering the number of submarines and drone systems which the Chinese have, which they can deal with as long as they're able to focus on it, instead of doing the anti-submarine warfare job, are off doing the F-35's job of air defense? Why would I want them doing that? It just, it doesn't make any sense. And Stu, on quad torpedo launches dead, or will they ever return? That's an interesting thing. At the moment, I'd say currently they're not visible in current systems. But if we start to see greater ranges for submarine engagements, then I wouldn't be surprised if you do see ships bring back more torpedo capabilities themselves. Stu, could you? Well, this has already been asked by, as I said, you wouldn't want to stick an F-35B on a destroyer. As said, in nicest way, if you have an F-35B on a destroyer, then it's not able to do. It's to support that. It's one fighter. It's not really helpful. It's also having to do vertical takeoff and landing, which is going to be the most inefficient use and utility of it. It's far better to have the F-35Bs on a carrier and have the helicopters on the destroyer. Now, here's the thing. Do you think you should take the helicopters off the carrier and stick them on the auxiliaries and the destroyers? I do. If I have space on my auxiliaries, I will gladly take helicopters off the carrier and still coordinate them from the carrier, but take them off the carrier and stick more fighters on the carrier, because that's useful for me. Because I want as many fighters as I can on the carrier. But this is something you have to start thinking through in terms of what's operationally useful. Because the carrier, if we go back to the design, is efficiently designed around operating. That's why it has that big flat deck, all that space. That is designed to operate fixed-wing aircraft at the best ability that they can be got out of on that budget. The destroyer, the flight deck's the bit on the aft, which in some ways is an afterthought. It's added on at the back. You can put an attack helicopter. If you want to put an attack helicopter on a destroyer, you can. But then you've got to remember that for most destroyers, the ASW helicopter is their most viable anti-submarine warfare capability. So you're removing that. And by the way, the sonar buoys and the other systems which the ASW helicopter have are also the anti-mine capability and the ability they have to go and try and listen and try and detect these things long before you get to get the destroyer turning up. So yeah, you don't want to get rid of that helicopter. It's a useful part of the destroyer's kit. Okay. Chris, how much of a hull form from keel up shared for a common hull across several specific purpose top of the ship, like light cruiser, light carriers in the US World War II? That wasn't really so much as a shared hull form as they had some light cruisers under construction and they converted them. Or rather, cruisers they converted into light carriers. That wasn't really so much as shared hull form as they just did a conversion, but realistically, if you have a large enough hull, it's easy enough to change around. It's actually more difficult the smaller hulls. Bigger hulls are easier to share around than smaller hulls. The hull form between a battle cruiser and an aircraft carrier in the 1920s and 30s are very, very similar. Length to breadth, length to beam ratio, etc. So it would be good to carry multiple helicopters, but again, they have to be designed to carry multiple helicopters. This is one of the problems, again, you can get into with destroyers. Most of them are designed, especially in the UK's case, to carry 2 Lynx, which are considered small helicopters, or 1 medium helicopter, i.e. a Merlin. Okay. That's lovely, but again, those helicopters have slightly different roles and slightly different overlapping capabilities. Complementary, but different. And Raleigh, stop it. They'll come for you when they want you, okay? You can complain all you like to me, but I'm not the one controlling the bedroom. It's not my job, and not my area. It's a case of, if you have the multiple helicopters, you have to design the ship for multiple helicopters. And this is another thing with the F-35 idea. You have to then design the ship to operate the F-35. You have to design the space around it. And it's It's not as simple as going, okay, I'm going to change the fuel in the fuel tank and swap out the stores. It's, have you got a big enough hangar space? Have you got a flight deck designed for that heat? Especially as it's going to be doing vertical takeoffs and landing continually on the same spot. You can't shift it around as much as you can on the carrier. You haven't got the same amount of space. So it's going to be landing in pretty much the same spot every single time. Have you got the right coolant stuff? Have you got the right equipment? You haven't got those stuff, you can't do it. It's one thing landing in emergency. You know, we're prepared to do that, that's an emergency. But landing under operational capability, that's a very different scenario. That's a very, very different scenario, isn't it, Big Fluff? And honestly, it gets more of an issue the further you go down the rabbit hole of these things. Because there are so many ideas which can look amazing, and then when you start looking at them in the harsh reality, you go, okay, that doesn't work like that. So probably if you want to do that, you have to have a bigger destroyer. Yes, pretty much. So the interesting thing I didn't notice with the Trump battleship was that they didn't mention how many helicopters or aircraft it could carry and aviation assets. And realistically, I would be expecting a next generation thing to be carrying 3 to 4, maybe 6 to 8 uncrewed rotary drones assets, which are not exactly a small beast, and 2 to 3 crewed helicopters, probably of a slightly larger type than the drones. And why do I want to mix them? Because I want to form my helicopters into basically hunting packs to go after submarines, and if I can delegate that authority to a helicopter to coordinate them, so the crewed helicopter coordinates the uncrewed assets in the hunt, then that offloads capability from my the communications and and strain from my destroyer onto the helicopters, and allows for a far more fluid, dynamic hunting pattern to take place. Oh. Sorry. Giving him a neck scrunchies. He does seem to enjoy this. Alright, the same way how submarines used to hunt. Yeah, or alternatively the same way escorts hunted in World War II. Have a look at the packs of things like the Black Swans, etc., and how they would hunt. They'd come along in a pack of 3 or 4 and would literally hunt you down all day quite happily. That's the point. If you have, for a helicopter hunting, if it's got another couple of uncrewed assets, they've all got dipping sonars. You could have 2 dipping sonars in the water, maybe 3, and you could be triangulating a submarine's position very accurately. And it can just get worse. If they're all dropping, in sonar buoys as well, then you've got 3 patterns of sonar buoys being laid, and suddenly the submarine's going, hang on, I got 3 patterns of sonar buoys on me. But the really interesting thing in that scenario is, that's going to increase the amount of sonar buoys you're going to go through. Okay? If you're using sonar buoys like that, yes, you're going to be getting more efficient in terms of your killing. So you're probably going to lose less as an overall structure, but the individual ships, we're getting through them a lot quicker. In which case, you're going to carry more. Oh, yeah, I've already talked through the Trump battleship on this channel. That's why I'm happy to refer to it, because I've already done a video about it. I have no intention of doing one again until there's a lot more being done on it. But realistically, it's very much a someone's done some stuff on ChatGPT or something to come up with designs. Exactly, the 3 Camel helicopters on the Kiros get almost no attention compared to the missile salon. Yeah. But ultimately, 3 Camovs are pretty damn useful because there's 3 of them. They might not be as good as some of their Western counterparts, thanks to the Soviet Union's very interesting problems with miniaturization when it came to some of the routes they went down, the computer processing route. But, this is the trouble with command economies. Occasionally you tend to have more focused efforts, but if you make the wrong decision, you go a long way down a bad path. But yeah, still, the fact there's 3 of them adds up. That's quite a lot of capability. But also, Lions on that hangar that could fit 2 medium helicopters, but landing pad size for a larger helicopter such as Chinook and Ospreys. Landing pads for Chinooks, Ospreys is quite standard these days. Again, it's a thing which almost most Western ships being built actually share. I think pretty much every image of the Type 26 at one point being produced showed them with a Chinook landing on the aft, and it was a case of it got so common that people were actually thinking that the Chinook was going to be the new anti-submarine warfare helicopter of the Royal Navy, and it was a case of, no, it's not. It's just we're advertising it can take a Chinook landing on it because it's got a big enough system. A big enough flight deck. Oh, Loudwood. I'm going to move the questions live sign, okay, just so I stop having to click them up. I'm just going to move it, okay? I do apologise. It's going to flick up to here. And I'm probably going to need to remember at a certain point to drop it down again, but I'm just going to do that. Okay. Alright, Loudwood, what are your thoughts, Reader Type 83 Destroyer? Similar to Drax in some ways, but different in others. For me, if I wanted a Type 83 destroyer, it's got to have a fairly large VLS capacity. I'm actually going through it in my head the other night and working out what I would want to put on it. And I came up with, if I was taking Type 45 as my baseline, I'd want 96 A50 cells for surface-to-air missiles. I'd want a good 64 Mark 41 VLS cells, probably split up into 2 sets of 32, co-located with the actually, no, I was 96 to 100, probably 128 actually A50s. So 64, 2 sets of 64 and a 32 of each one. So I have 2 sets of 96 cells together, but they're made up of 32 Mark 41s and 64 silver A50s. And then probably would want about 64 C-Scepter cells in 4 sets of 16 around the ship. And that would be my base missile load. And then, if I had my way, she'd be carrying 4 3-inch guns, Otto Breda 76, and 4 close-in weapon systems, as in sort of probably something like Phalanx, but hopefully a better Phalanx, and 4 lasers each, so to have 12 of those, and then would have... Gonna have to settle for 5-inch guns, but I would have liked to have 6-inch guns. We might see a reload capability, Carl Gasberg, for the VLS on C. Again, Carl, you've been doing this, coming to this channel long enough. Use the @ not the... There you go. There you go, Carl Gasberg. How to do it. But part of the thing is, the reason I'd be designing it quite so heavy like that is because I'd be designing a destroyer which, if it turns up, immediately looks at everyone looking and going, okay, the British have arrived. And the British have an overarching capability of firepower muscle turning up in this ship, which means that you have to listen. The British are already a factor. There are something... We would really like one of those in our task groups. We would really like a task group of that turn up, and It's got enough missile depth that even if it doesn't have reloading at sea cracked by that point, you can. It's got enough missile depth that it's going to be a case of, okay, to exhaust this is going to take some effort. Oh, I want a lot more. I would want at least 12. I'd want at least 12. Again, it's one of those things of the more you get, the more operations you get. Okay, sis? Finally taking the birthday boy off the bed. The Ralsonian calendar kicks in at 9:05 exactly every single time. I know. No one else in the world is supposed to have a life other than Raleigh. Raleigh decides it's bedtime at 9:05, and lo and behold, anyone who's keeping up. We are merely waiters for our poodle and corgi masters.
I think corgi has to sometimes work round, apart from at night when he decides that.
No, the corgi has an even earlier bedtime than the poodle, and lo and behold, if you try and disturb that.
If you disturb it, it's 2 hours.
Yes. What I power with? Ooh. Well, if you go back to one of my earlier videos of this year, you'll notice that I came with I did point out a whole new system of power systems, and I would actually design it with probably nuclear for the base load, even though for Britain that does represent an issue. And one of the reasons we could get away with it is because our other ships aren't nuclear, so they can do the visits. But for us, having a nuclear-powered destroyer in that size would be quite useful for the base load and giving it quite good range. But also, I would want nuclear and gas turbine. And I'd have the gas turbine so I could spin them on to power up the lasers and other systems. So basically, if I want to boost power up for any other reason, I turn on a gas turbine, and I have that to turn on. Because the gas turbines are very quick to turn on and off, whereas a nuclear reactors don't really they like to be set up and run at a constant. So if you want to get a nuclear reactor to be most efficient, you want to set it for your baseload and run it as your baseload. So you work out your baseload and you run the reactor to your baseload. Maybe your baseload slightly plus, so you can trickle charge your capacitors and batteries to keep them going. Hello, autofocus, please. Thank you. It's getting it used to the new lights. There are new lights being fitted in here. But if you have that, if you have that set up, that's going to be a very, very interesting system to get past people. That's what I would do, but I am looking at it from the previous. I'm looking at it from the British political perspective. It'll probably be combined gas and diesel. Exactly. The Rolls-Royce small modular reactors would be a very good starting point for a CONAG system. And there's also CONAGDA, which is combined nuclear and gas and diesel. Which is, I also have diesel generators in the... Why? In case of emergencies, turn on diesel. No, you don't want two nuclear reactors. You don't want multiple nuclear systems. A nice way to chemistry them is too much fun, and even then, you'd be turning one on and off. Again, the problem with nuclear, you want the base load. You want it at a constant. It's the turning the reactor on and off which causes the issue with the reactor. Okay, you don't want to be having to place around. But if you can turn a reactor on and just leave it running, it will be happiest. A running, humming reactor is a happy reactor. A reactor you keep having to change the power production of is an unhappy reactor. So if you want basically a nuclear reactor for your base load, for your standard hotel load and base load of the ship, so whatever its standard operations, and then you have a gas power supply you turn on when you need to boost it up. Exactly, Bichon. The Kirill battle cruisers are nuclear and oil-fired boilers. Exactly. They have the nuclear. They have the nuclear for the base load and the oil firing for the, when you need to boost things up. Yeah. Bichon, did sailors run back and forth in early Victorian tests, like how they capsized ships in Pirates of the Caribbean? Not by Victorian times, but earlier than that, they certainly were involved in various interesting things when you're turning a ship over. Because remember, sometimes you're turning a ship over for reasons, or you're just hauling a ship over so you can get its hull. You might be hauling the ship out of water. You might decide to turn it over. There are lots of different ideas people have for how to maintain them. Bishop, the trouble is, this is my one problem with the batteries of the power source. Batteries can be depleted, and if you have an ongoing engagement, that's not what you want. So you would probably have, in the nicest way, you would, even if you had a nuclear and gas system, you probably would have batteries as well. But the gas provides you the ongoing capability for a longer engagement. And I can see both the arguments for and against nuclear systems, and as I said, I can understand why people are making the arguments against nuclear as a baseload, but there were advantages to having a Virginia class when it was a nuclear cruiser. There were advantages to it, and I think some of those advantages are forgotten about nuclear-powered surface ships. Yeah, but most ships, these, in a nice way, batteries aboard warships, including submarines, and have been something which have been around for quite a long time. So whilst they do degrade over time, they're also something which we're quite used to working with. You need to replace them quite regularly. But also it becomes another signifier of when operations are going to begin, because as shown in Red Storm Rising, when they took a whole fleet of ships subs out of service for a few days to refit all new batteries, that was quite a good advantage of the things. Oh, Sid, you ran into Nightbot. You ran into the Nightbot. And I don't think they're ever going to get... Let me put it this way. In the times that we're talking about, respectively, maybe by the time I'm in my 80s, but not by the time I'm in my... and I'm currently in my late 30s. So maybe 40, 50 years down the road, we're talking about battery-powered warships. As a common thing, at the moment, I don't see them as something which we're going to have to deal with any time in terms of large warships any time in the next 40 odd years, 40, 50 years. Most of the issues around using nuclear reactors, etc., are political and image rather than reality. Bichon, inclining test curves of stability. Read in D.K. Brown's book, Warrior to Dreadnought, about the seen officer official World War II era photos of testing being done PSI. Yeah, they do also, as I talked about, you do test the curves of stability. You do try and see at which point a ship starts to roll over. You do tend to try and do it pierside using cranes, so you can stop it actually going into the water, but it has been known to take the cranes with it. And trains. and everything else with it. Precisely. Is putting Stirling-type power generators on a surface ship viable as powered like it is on a submarine? You could do it, but there's a reason there aren't many submarines powered with Stirling power systems. It's one of those systems which has its benefits are enough in a submarine to justify it versus its costs in terms of maintenance and other issues. In terms of a surface ship, there are other systems which provide almost the same amount of capabilities, but a lot easier to maintain. And that's usually the problem. You know, a lot of these systems, they can look very good on paper when you're looking at stats, but always check out the maintenance and complications of maintenance and the difficulty of maintaining them versus other systems. And that's another thing which usually provides a continuity bias in terms of recreating the same systems in even newer versions of the same systems, because it's easier to train personnel to jump from an older version of the system to a newer version of the system than it's to jump from from one system to a completely different system. And those training costs and that training time is a factor in terms of your force generation. Lava, do you think the QEs will see a catapult refit in future, or over something purpose designed to replace them? I don't think. Look. We're going to see how things go out. It's going to depend on F-35 availability. It's going to depend on the future generation of various aircraft types. They might get retrofitted with a catapult, they might not, but also I don't see them being replaced in time 40 years. I'm sorry. The Queen Elizabeth class carriers are going to be here for a long time. They're going to be here for a very, very long time. They are probably still going to be about retired and replaced in about the 2060s. Yeah, that's likely it. There's just no budget, no interest in it. People put forward all sorts of great ideas, but the thing is, again, we have to first recapitalize and rebuild our escort numbers. Then, if I'm my priority after I've dealt with the sort out escorts is going to be the fleet auxiliaries. After I've done the fleet hopefully doing the submarines at the same time, because the submarines have to be done. And then priority before I start rebuilding a whole new carrier program to replace the existing carriers which are working and are fine, it would be rebuilding the amphibious task group section. Because if you haven't noticed that, we haven't got Ocean, Albion, Bulwark, or any of the ships to replace them. So honestly, replacing the carriers which are working and we just haven't bought enough aircraft for, but we need to buy, so we need to sort that out. It's not high up on the list. Maybe if issues continue on with procuring aircraft for them, there is a conversation about fitting catapults to them and what aircraft types we can get. Maybe. Or alternatively, there is, do we develop our own indigenous uncrewed aviation asset to act as a loyal wingman for the onboard aircraft? Those are options. But replacing the carriers with something new, something different, is going to be a long way down the list of things we're going to do. A long way down the list. Nice everyone. Can we say the Queen Elizabeth class carriers are untouchable? No. Nothing in defence is of that level. I wish it was, but nothing in defence of that is that level. And again, if we ordered 2 more Queen Elizabeths, that'd be great. But again, there are HDs and things we need to build first. And we would need to buy a whole lot of F-35Bs to make that work. That's the reality of it. I wish it weren't quite so stark, but it is that situation. And yep. Defence Committee, we're talking about in the UK at the moment, we're talking about the Defence Committee and Defence in the High North. They've got a picture of an Astute-class submarine involved in it, and the only operational Astute is currently off its way to Australia. The reason we're down so few operational Astutes is because the infrastructure upgrade in terms of the dock and dry dock facilities for submarines is about a decade behind its schedule. It's finally starting to service. We're finally starting to speed up the dry docking ships, but that has had a knock-on effect to their operational capability. And one of the reasons we felt we could go down to 6 for justified was because we'd have the dry dock facilities to make it work and be able to be really efficient. Please note the earlier point about trials. You have the facilities you need for justify what you want. If you don't have, you say, I'm going to build 6 ships to guarantee this availability. If you don't build the infrastructure to support those 6 ships so you have the availability, you aren't going to have it. One of the problems we have with the Queen Elizabeth class is currently we only have 1 dry dock in the UK, which can realistically be used at the moment for the Queen Elizabeth class to go into and out of. Which means, so when they need work, they have to go into that dry dock. We need to build another one and get another one. We need to get another couple sort of worked up. We actually have dry docks which are big enough for them to go into, but they haven't been cleared and spec'd for them to go into and haven't necessarily got the facilities needed to take them. This is about retrofitting and upgrading infrastructure, not about building new infrastructure, and we haven't done it. And you know what's the really, really sad part about all this? Okay, I'm using Britain as an example because I can use Britain as an example and I don't get people going, oh, you're a British guy, you're just slagging off our country, we're brilliant. But I can point to America, I can point to France, I can point to anyone. They all have some problems. Is that they're willing to fund the showstopper part of the act, the aircraft carrier, but then they will save money on things like the infrastructure to support it, because they're saving a few million on a multi-billion-pound program. And that's a good thing for you, the taxpayers. And then that leads to problems down the road. So we have spent multiple billion on submarines. The upgrade, the dry docks, I think, has cost less than 100 mil. We have got £6 billion plus worth of assets. Then we add in the opportunity cost of not having them available. Then we add in the crew training costs of not having them available. We add in the security costs of not having them available. All that building up and all the weapon systems on board them, etc. We're probably talking about, I would conservative estimate, about £60 billion worth of stuff and value. Not able to move because we saved 100 million. Every carrier is incredibly vulnerable without good escort. Every carrier is part of a task group. Renegade Marine. The Royal Navy's currently the Royal Navy is okay for manpower. It's the Fleet Auxiliary which is having the manpower issues. So you will often see them being conflated because by some reports, because in America they are one service, in the UK they're not. The Fleet Auxiliary is commissioned but are civilians. And that's kept that way so they can go into certain ports even in wartime without being a civilian ship technically entering port, not a warship, and get supplies that way. That's one reason we kept the RFA thing. But the British government is trying to save money by not giving the by trying to keep the RFA on as cheap a contract as they possibly can. So they're currently not paying them competitive rates. And because they are merchant marine, they can go and work in other parts of the merchant marine. They can go and work for Cunard and P&O and all those people. And that means there's direct competition going on. And the British government keeps going, well, we offer other benefits. And you sit there and go, you really don't. You don't. It used to be there was longer term guaranteed employment. That was when the RFA was larger. They had better chance of advancement and getting the training. That was when it was larger. You've shrunk it down. Those things have disappeared a bit, and you aren't paying them. So it's the sorry, you got out at the worst time. It should be doing it properly. It should be doing. It says the ads should be doing it properly. Stream settings. Make sure the ads are set up right. Go and have an argue with YouTube, because it does like to sometimes have fun on me. No. Stop doing this. It keeps changing it. I set it as scheduled for every 30 minutes. And then it just decides to change it. But yeah, the Royal Navy's carrier. The main thing the Royal Navy is covering shortage of, the fact, the moment, is dry docks, and that's why we've got Type 45. They also kept surging Type 45, so a whole load of building work is built up them, and the Type 23s. A good example is the build quality. Slide. If I go back to it, basically they're just worn out through old age, and they need to be the replacements needed to start about half a decade ago, at least, if not earlier, and they weren't start. They haven't even started really replacing them, because whilst the ships have been in construction, those ships aren't commissioning. The first Royal Navy Type 26 is due to commission in 2027-28, so next year. And the first Type 31 isn't due to commission the Royal Navy till 2026, 2027. So we've got a Type 31 and a Type 26 entering service next year. Then we've got a Type 26 entering service the year after, which is going to help. But the Type 23s are going to be going out of service as quickly as they're coming in service. Yeah, there are all sorts of issues. There is no navy in the world, and I know I've got a video coming up on the Chinese Navy, and the Chinese Navy is built, and even they have the issues. There is no navy in the world which doesn't have issues. This is the point. Because it seems to be a universal thing around the world that people will, to try and save a few pennies in terms of the program cost, a few pennies, they will hamstrung pounds. Because again, the easiest thing to keep investing in and to keep up to grade, if you consider Britain, is infrastructure for our ship and navies. Why? Because we built so much of it. We had a huge frigating amount of infrastructure left over from World War One. We had so much that even in World War Two, we had enough infrastructure for expanding a navy. Keeping that infrastructure going and upgraded would have been pennies on the pound compared to rebuilding it from scratch, as we might have to do now. Because the dry docks and facilities have gotten into such a bad state of repair. Because people were saving money. Hey, look, the Renegade Marine, I've done a whole video on the Zumwalts. And pointed out what the issue to Zumwalts. And the Zumwalts, the issue with them is people had bright ideas. They could have been quite a very good class, but they had bright ideas. Lowell, would fusion reactors have applications over fission reactors in vessels, or is that in UK's case far less relevant, and at least in the case of the Navy? It's going to depend on how well you can control them, what size, power density they're going to be, and whether you need that amount of power for that level of complication. But again, it's going to be a lot further away at the time. Will the USN keep the LCS? For a while they will. Ramol, is it true the USN actually wants GRF? Is it true DSN actually wanted the General Ford as a one-off ship like Enterprise, and the actual General Ford class is a total improvement and mass-produced version of the one-off General Ford? Not really, but let's put it this way: the General Ford, kind of like the Zumwaltz, was stuck with a whole load of new systems which were implemented in one hull. The trouble is, the Gerald R. Ford, unlike the Zumwaltz, can't be cancelled because it's a carrier program, and it's too big to fail. So they actually had to work it through, and they fixed it all, managed to get it working. But this is why you have the image you have of the Gerald R. Fords that, you have one off and the rest of the mass produced. No, it's literally, it's first in class, and there are problems. Because we not only have the first in class, we've implemented all these brand new techs, all this brand new technology which we hadn't de-risked at all, and we've got all that working together first time, and oh my, we have problems, and everyone's sitting there going, yes, we're all so surprised after you insisted on it. Yeah. Ramol, do you think if they make the General Ford... No. The reason the USN are building at the rate they're building because of the way they've hamstrung their own infrastructure. That's the reality of it. That they would need to do a lot of work to increase their pace of construction. They would need to do a lot of work and a lot of investment, and the trouble is they're too busy fighting over who should make that investment for them to actually do it. And that's, again, the same in most countries. I'm sorry, it's a standard disease you have with a system where a lot of the system process has been privatized in the name of saving money. They have privatized a lot of these systems to save money, because private companies will run it more cheaply. Well, actually, that means the cost of maintenance and infrastructure is on the private company, which will run it efficiently for them. But they also will have to make a profit, because that is the thing private companies have to do, and that's not a bad thing. That's what a private company exists for. That's fine if there's a competitive market. Then there's multiple private companies you can go through, which will keep them roughly honest and with an acceptable range of profit, and you have the option. But if you end up in a monopolistic situation where there is literally one private company which can supply one nation with the goods, and that nation can only buy from that company, and that company can only sell to one nation, that becomes a very, very toxic relationship very quickly. Because all that private company's profit comes from that nation's taxpayers. And that nation has no option to be able to go anywhere else, because only that private company can supply it. So it's a monopolistic situation for both sides. I'm your only customer. You're my only... It doesn't create a good relationship. This is why Royal Dockyard used to be a sensible thing. Because if you think about it, in the corporate world, think about it from this perspective. If you are a company, and only you buy something, and only one other and a company only sells that thing to you, do you want to leave that company run by someone else? Because if they go bankrupt or they do something, you're completely out, and you've no longer got the stuff. Which is usually why one of the other buys the other, whoever's bigger. It's the reality. The reason is mostly because it took it took a while to build them, but also, as I said, it was testing the Gerald R. Ford and actually getting the stuff to work because they chucked so much new stuff on it. I said, what are the problems with the plan as they seem to get humming along? The plan are be careful, because the People's Liberation Army Navy are very good. I don't like the people who just basically say they're terrible. They're not. But they also have a very good media machine and very good control of their media image. And that can give you, especially in the West, a very interesting viewpoint on them. It's one of the things I found interesting when I was in Japan, and when I'm talking to Korean colleagues, and I'm talking to colleagues in Vietnam, etc., and talking to them and their perspective on the Chinese Navy. They will tell you other things, because they are far closer. They have a far more ongoing image and relationship. They don't just see occasional bits. They actually see a lot of it. And if you go and look at their sources on the internet and go and look at their website, the web page and the articles, etc., coming from those countries about the Chinese Navy, they are far more perspective of their capabilities, but also far more perspective of their problems in terms of their procurement, and how they suffer from the similar thing as the Soviet Union did, where if something has big enough political connections, you can't stop its construction, even when it's past the point of being useful. Again, I would give the example of the Joseph Stalin tank. That was really not useful. The S3 at certain points was frankly useless, but it still kept being built. Ramol, do you think USN would also take a while to test it out? They're going to take a while to test out any of these things. It takes a while to test any of these ships. No, the plan to have the plan advantages come from that they are producing a large quantity of ships. The plan problems come from the fact they're producing a large quantity of ships. Okay? It's the cheerleader effect. Okay, if you don't understand what I'm talking to and referencing, if you've ever watched, what was it called? Have you met Ted? Or rather, How I Met Your Mother. Have You Met Ted was what I used to call it. How I Met Your Mother is its official name. And the character called Barney Stinson comes up with this phrase called the cheerleader effect. Whenever you have a group of guys or a group of girls together, or a group of, and they're all hanging out together looking happy and fun, and if they're a large enough group, they all look amazingly pretty. They all look very handsome, whatever. But then if you actually look at them, you go, and individually, you go, oh, that had that problem, and that had that problem, and that had that problem. And that's the problem for the Chinese Navy. As a collective, they're doing very, very well. They're producing a large number of ships, and that's excellent. Also, they have produced a large number of ships and have spun themselves up really quickly. And yeah, they're still built by humans, and humans have the same issues everywhere in the world. And mistakes happen. So, yes, that's the reality. Anyway, with that being said, thank you very much for watching this evening. I hope you've enjoyed. What have we got coming up? Well, this week's video was Royal Navy destroyers in the interwar years, what they got up to, and how they, what I called thoughtful aggression. And next week is the Dutch destroyers. I hope you enjoy those. I hope you have seen those. And I'm going to be putting up the lives and various things coming up because we've got a whole load of videos coming up in terms of lives. In February, we have the rise and fall of the Constellation class frigate program. It'll be a nice companion to the Zumwalt class, and yeah, that's going to be alive. Then we have Steve Clarke, Premier, Japanese Naval Aviation, 1930s and 40s. What were their procurement systems and planning? Runon, Chief, I find this problem to be annoying. Let's fix it. Top 5, bottom 5 inventions, adaptations of Royal Navy ships live. And that could have its date switched around because I'm now doing emergency cover for a company and during that's going to be away on a Thursday. So I might not want to do that live from a travel lodge. And then we've got Robert Locke, Exodus, the escape of European warships, including incomplete ones, one step ahead of the Germans. Premiere, that's going to be February's. And then we've got for March, 1920s small carrier swarm, modern merchant cruisers, Paul from Chicago's World War I mutinies and the Royal Navy, and Premier Wayne Borean's during World War II, what were the naval commanders Australia, Canada, New Zealand as fleet requirements? That's going to be an interesting one. And as I said, the April is open at the moment. April is open. So if you go to the Patreon page, you can make suggestions for April topics, and then they will be up for vote soon. So, at the moment, I've already reached about 20 comments. So I usually put the vote up when I reach roughly 25, 30. So at this rate, it'll be Monday. So you might not have much time, considering I literally opened it today and I've already reached about 21. So yeah. Take care, everyone. Hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching. Yes, it's going to be the Dutch Navy. Sangloon, it's going to be it's the Dutch Navy, the freest of free navies. That's next Tuesday's video. Take care, everyone. Toodles.